Yo, what's up everyone? It's Gringotts Hub, and today we're checking out, what if Harry audited the Potter-Black-Peverell vaults and found Dumbledore had stolen 1 million galleons. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, Blood and Ledgers. The morning of July 31st tasted like dust and regret. Harry Potter sat on the edge of his bed at number 4, Privet Drive, watching the clock tick past midnight with the kind of hollow attention you give to something when you're trying not to think about everything else. 17. He was 17 years old, and the trace had just shattered off him like old paint, and somewhere in the back of his mind he could feel the difference, a looseness in his magic, like a muscle unclenching for the first time in years. Hedwig clicked her beak softly from her cage. He looked at her, and she looked back with those amber eyes that always seemed to know more than any owl should. "Yeah," he said. "I feel it too." He'd planned this for 3 weeks. Not obsessively, he wasn't Hermione, but with the quiet, grinding determination of someone who'd been lied to enough times to stop waiting for the truth to show up on its own. It had started with a letter from Gringotts, delivered by a goblin courier rather than owl post, which should have been his first clue that something serious was happening. The letter was terse, formal, and contained exactly one sentence that mattered. "Upon your magical majority, the nation of Gringotts formally requests your presence to discuss matters of considerable financial irregularity pertaining to your hereditary accounts." Financial irregularity. He'd read those 2 words about 40 times, turning them over like stones in a riverbed, and every time he came back to the same conclusion: someone had been doing something with his money that they shouldn't have been doing. He had a pretty good guess who. Harry stood, pulled on his jacket, and picked up the moleskin pouch Hagrid had given him years ago. His wand went into the holster he'd bought in Diagon Alley last summer, against Dumbledore's recommendation, he remembered now, which at the time had seemed like gentle advice and in retrospect seemed like something else entirely. He didn't bother being quiet going down the stairs. The Dursleys were asleep and he was 17 and he was never coming back to this house again. His trunk was already shrunk in his pocket, a bit of magic he'd practiced wandlessly over the last week, clumsy but effective, as if his magic had been straining at the leash of the trace and was now practically leaping out of him. The night air hit him warm and close. Suburban Little Whinging sprawled around him in its tedious perfection, every lawn trimmed, every car washed, every secret kept behind identical curtains. Harry stuck out his wand hand and the night bus slammed into existence with a bang that set off a car alarm 3 streets over. Stan Shunpike, out on bail, hollow-eyed, not the same man he'd been, opened the door. "Welcome to the Diagon Alley," Harry said, pressing gold into his hand. "Fast as you can." Stan blinked at the scar, then at the gold, then nodded without the usual theatrics. Even he could read a mood. The bus lurched through folded space, and Harry gripped the brass rail and watched England blur past the windows, fields, cities, coastline, all of it smeared together like a watercolor left in the rain. 20 minutes of controlled chaos later, the bus spat him out in front of the leaky cauldron, and he was moving before the doors fully opened. Diagon Alley at 1 in the morning was a different creature than its daytime self. The shops were shuttered and dark, but the alley itself wasn't empty. There were figures in doorways, lights in upper windows, the distant sound of someone arguing in Knockturn Alley. The wizarding world didn't sleep, not really. It just got more honest about what it was after dark. Gringotts blazed white in the darkness, its marble facade lit by torches that had been burning since before the Statute of Secrecy. The doors were open. They were always open. Goblins didn't close for business, the very concept offended them. Harry walked up the steps and through the bronze doors, then through the silver doors with their famous warning, and into the vast hall beyond. A handful of goblins worked at their stations, weighing coins, scratching figures into ledgers, doing whatever it was goblins did at 1 in the morning on a Wednesday. One of them looked up as Harry approached the nearest counter. "I'm Harry Potter," he said. "I received a letter requesting my presence upon my 17th birthday. I'm here." The goblin studied him for a long moment, not his scar, but his eyes, his posture, the way he stood. Whatever it found there must have satisfied something, because it nodded once and said, "You are expected. Follow." Not, "Please follow," or, "If you would. Just follow." Harry appreciated that. They went through a door behind the counter, down a corridor lit by gold-flamed sconces, past 2 armed goblin guards who tracked Harry with eyes like wet black stones, and into a room that was nothing like Harry expected. He'd braced himself for another version of the cart tunnels, dark, damp, vaguely threatening. Instead, he found himself in what could only be described as an office, albeit one designed by someone who believed furniture should intimidate. The desk was black ironwood. The chairs were leather and brass. The walls were lined with ledgers that went from floor to ceiling, each one thick enough to bludgeon someone with, and Harry had the distinct impression that goblins had in fact done exactly that at various points in history. Behind the desk sat a goblin who was clearly not a teller or a cart driver or any of the lower functionaries Harry had dealt with before. This goblin was old, ancient, maybe, with a face like a cliff that had been arguing with the sea for 1,000 years and winning. He wore armor under his banking robes, which Harry clocked immediately and filed away. "Sit," the goblin said. Harry sat. "I am Ragnok," the goblin said. "Director of the Gringotts London branch. I do not typically handle individual client accounts. I am handling yours because the irregularities we have discovered are of a nature and scale that demanded my personal attention." He paused. "Also because several of my subordinates were afraid of the political consequences of what we found, and I am not afraid of anything." Harry almost smiled. "Almost. Before we proceed," Ragnok continued, "we require blood verification. Not the simple key-based access you have used previously. Full hereditary confirmation. This will establish your identity, your bloodline, your hereditary claims, and any magical bonds, contracts, or enchantments currently affecting your person." He pushed a sheet of parchment across the desk, pale, thick, clearly not ordinary paper, along with a dagger that looked older than the building. 7 drops on the parchment. The blade is self-sterilizing. Harry picked up the dagger without hesitation. He'd faced worse than a little blood. The blade was sharp enough that he barely felt it open the tip of his index finger. 7 drops fell onto the parchment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, each one sinking in and spreading like ink in water, tracing lines and letters that wrote themselves in dark crimson. Ragnok watched the parchment with an expression Harry couldn't read. Then the goblin's eyes widened, fractionally, controlled, but definitely wider, and he leaned forward. "Well," Ragnok said softly. "That is rather more than we expected." He turned the parchment so Harry could read it. Harry read it. Then he read it again. Then a third time, because the words kept rearranging themselves in his head, not because the parchment was unclear but because his brain was actively rejecting the implications. Blood inheritance verification, Harry James Potter born, July 31, 1980 father, James Charles Potter, deceased, head of the most ancient and noble house of Potter mother, Lily Potter née Evans, deceased, Muggleborn, confirmed magical bloodline traced to Peverell through Ignotus Peverell squib line hereditary titles, Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Potter, by blood, through father, Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black, by magical bequest, confirmed by blood and will of Sirius Orion Black 3, Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Peverell, by blood, through mother's line, dormant, claimable, Wizengamot seats, 3, Potter, hereditary, Black, bequeathed, Peverell, dormant, claimable upon assumption of lordship, properties, Potter Manor, Gwynedd, Wales, under Fidelius, secret keeper, Albus Pwb. Dumbledore, 12, Grimmauld Place, London, inherited from Sirius Black, Peverell Keep, Dartmoor, Devon, dormant estate, condition unknown, cottage, Godric's Hollow, partial ruin, preserved as heritage site, flat, 14 Diagon Alley, tenanted, rental income directed to, see financial audit. He owned a flat in Diagon Alley. He owned a manor house in Wales. Dumbledore was the secret keeper for a property Harry hadn't known existed. His eyes kept going. Active magical bonds and contracts on subject, Magical Guardian Bond, Albus Pwb Dumbledore, filed November 1, 1981, note, filed in contradiction to the last will and testament of James and Lily Potter, which was sealed by order of the Chief Warlock on November 3, 1981, Harry stopped reading. My parents had a will, he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat, stripped of something. They did, Ragnok said. And Dumbledore sealed it. 2 days after filing himself as your magical guardian. The will, according to our records, named Sirius Black as your primary guardian, Alice Longbottom as secondary, and explicitly, I will quote directly, under no circumstances is Harry to be placed with Petunia and Vernon Dursley, as they have expressed open hostility toward the magical world and toward our son specifically. The room went very quiet. Harry could hear his own heartbeat. Could feel his magic doing something it had never done before, not surging wildly like it had when he blew up Aunt Marge, but compressing, pulling inward, getting dense and hot like a star about to ignite. Show me the financial audit, Harry said. Ragnok opened a ledger that had been sitting on his desk, and Harry realized it had been there the whole time, waiting. The goblin turned it to face Harry and began to speak in the clipped, precise tone of someone presenting evidence. The Potter family vault, your trust vault, Vault 687, is a subsidiary account. The main Potter vault is Vault 71. At the time of your parents' death, the combined liquid assets of the Potter estate totaled approximately 1,400,000 galleons, along with considerable non-liquid assets including properties, artifacts, investments, and a 12% stake in the Daily Prophet. Harry's hands were gripping the armrests of his chair. Beginning on November 5, 1981, 2 days after Dumbledore sealed your parents' will and installed himself as your magical guardian, withdrawals began. Ragnok turned a page. The first was 10,000 galleons, transferred to a Hogwarts discretionary fund accessible only to the headmaster. The second, 3 days later, was 15,000 galleons to the same fund. Over the following 15 years, withdrawals were made at irregular but consistent intervals, averaging between 5 and 8,000 galleons per month. Harry did the math in his head. It wasn't hard. 5,000 a month for 15 years was 900,000 galleons. 8,000 a month was over 1 million. The total, Ragnok said, as if reading his thoughts, is 973,614 galleons, 11 sickles, and 3 nuts. He paused. We counted the nuts. We are thorough. Where did it go? Harry's voice was still that strange flat thing, but underneath it, his magic was singing, not a pleasant song, something older and darker and full of teeth. Ragnok turned several more pages. The audit trail is complex, and I suspect deliberately so. But we have had our best forensic accountants on this for the past 6 weeks, since we first discovered the irregularities during a routine review triggered by the approaching date of your majority. The funds were distributed across multiple channels. He began ticking them off with a long, clawed finger. Approximately 300,000 galleons to the Order of the Phoenix Operating Fund. Approximately 150,000 to various ministry officials in the form of donations, gifts, and what I will diplomatically call incentive payments. Approximately 100,000 to Hogwarts infrastructure projects that were publicly funded by the ministry but were in fact not. Approximately 80,000 in direct payments to one Albus Dumbledore's personal vault, for expenses, according to the transfer notes. Approximately 70,000 to a vault registered to the Weasley family. Harry flinched. He actually physically flinched, and he hated himself for it. The Weasley payments, Ragnok continued, watching Harry's face with a banker's dispassion, were structured as monthly stipends beginning in September of 1991, the month you started at Hogwarts, and were listed under the code designation, Subject Monitoring and Companionship Services. The world tilted. Ron. The code said Companionship Services. Someone, Dumbledore, had been paying the Weasleys to, no. Stop. Think. Harry forced himself to breathe. Forced himself to think like a person and not like the screaming thing that wanted to tear this building apart stone by stone. The Weasleys were poor. He knew that. Everyone knew that. And Mrs. Weasley had been suspiciously present at King's Cross that first day, loudly asking about the platform number as if she didn't take her children there every single year. And Ron had found him on the train. And everything after that had it all been a lie? "I need to ask you something," Harry said, "and I need you to answer honestly." Ragnok inclined his head. "Is it possible the Weasleys didn't know where the money was coming from? That Dumbledore paid them and told them it was something else, compensation for hosting me during summers, or help from a charitable fund, or something that wouldn't make them feel like they were being paid to spy on a kid?" Ragnok considered this. "It is possible. The payments were routed through a charitable trust called the Pruitt Memorial Fund, which would have appeared to originate from Molly Weasley's family estate. Whether the recipients believed this fiction is not something our audit can determine." Harry let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It wasn't proof of innocence, not for all of them, maybe not for any of them, but it was enough ambiguity to keep him from doing something he couldn't take back. "Continue," he said. "The remaining funds, approximately 200,000 galleons, were distributed in smaller amounts across various accounts, some of which we are still tracing. What I can tell you with certainty is that the authorized signatory on every single withdrawal was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, acting in his capacity as your magical guardian." Ragnok closed the ledger. "Under Goblin law, this constitutes line theft, the most severe financial crime recognized by our nation. Under Wizarding law, I am told it constitutes fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, theft, and violation of the sacred trust of guardianship, which carries a mandatory sentence in Azkaban." Harry stared at the closed ledger. 973,000 galleons. His parents' money. Money they'd earned, saved, inherited, money that was supposed to keep him safe, give him a home, give him the childhood they knew they might not survive to provide. And Dumbledore had taken it and used it to fund his war, by his allies, and pay people to keep Harry Potter docile and dependent and exactly where the old man wanted him. "I want to claim my lordships," Harry said. "All three." Ragnok smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, goblin smiles never were, but there was something in it that Harry recognized. Satisfaction. Maybe even respect. "We hoped you would say that." The process was more involved than Harry expected but less painful than he'd feared. 3 rings were brought out, the Potter ring, a gold band set with a ruby, the black ring, silver and onyx, the Peverell ring, ancient beyond reckoning, a simple band of some dark metal with a symbol Harry recognized as the Deathly Hallows mark. He put them on one at a time, and each one blazed with heat as it accepted his blood and magic, the Potter ring on his right hand, the black ring on his left, the Peverell ring reshaping itself to sit alongside the Potter ring like it had been waiting for the reunion. Each ring brought knowledge with it, not facts, exactly, but awareness. He could feel the wards of Grimmauld Place like a second skin. Could sense, distantly, the existence of Potter Manor in Wales, alive and waiting behind its Fidelius charm. The Peverell ring did something different, it seemed to settle into his magic and deepen it, like roots finding water. "There is one more matter," Ragnok said, once the rings were settled and Harry's vision had stopped swimming. The goblin reached into his desk and produced a smaller ledger, this one bound in black leather with silver clasps. "The Black Family Vault. When Sirius Black named you his heir, the full Black fortune transferred to your control. This was not touched by Dumbledore, Black kept his own wards, and even the chief warlock couldn't breach goblin security on a vault whose owner was alive and had given no authorization. The Black fortune is intact. Approximately 600,000 galleons liquid, plus properties, artifacts, and an extensive library of, I am required to note, some quite legally questionable texts. And the Peverell Vault? Dormant for over 4 centuries. Its contents are unknown, as the vault has not been opened in that time. It is, however, very deep in our tunnels. The deep vaults tend to be interesting. Harry sat back in his chair. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. 3 seats on the Wizengamot. Enough money to fund a small war, or, he supposed, to fight back against a large one. Properties, political power, and the kind of evidence that could destroy Albus Dumbledore's reputation overnight. Ragnok, Harry said, I want to do several things, and I want to do them tonight. I am listening. First, I want every vault Dumbledore has access to frozen. I don't care what authorization he has. As Lord Potter and Lord Black, I'm revoking every permission, every key, every access point he has to anything connected to my houses. Done, Ragnok said, making a note. Effective immediately. Second, I want a full copy of the audit, certified by Gringotts, magically verified, admissible in both the Wizengamot and the International Confederation of Wizards. It will be prepared within the hour. Third, I want to know about that marriage contract you mentioned in the initial verification. Ragnok's expression shifted. You noticed that. You put it in the blood results and thought I wouldn't. I had hoped you would. The goblin opened the smaller ledger. A marriage contract was filed on your behalf by Albus Dumbledore, acting as magical guardian, on the 14th of August, 1994. The contract binds you to Ginevra Molly Weasley upon her 17th birthday. Harry's jaw tightened. Ginny. He thought of the girl who'd shoved her elbow in a butter dish the first time she saw him, the girl who'd fought beside him in the Department of Mysteries, the girl he'd dated for a few weeks before Dumbledore's funeral, and the question that had been nagging him since 6th year suddenly had an answer. Had those feelings been real? Or had they been helped along by a contract he never signed? Can it be dissolved? A contract filed by a guardian without the knowledge or consent of the principal party, particularly when that guardianship itself was obtained fraudulently, is void under both goblin and wizarding law. I have already drafted the annulment. It requires only your signature and magical imprint. Harry signed it without a second's hesitation. Whatever he felt or didn't feel for Ginny Weasley, he would figure it out on his own terms, not because some old man had decided his love life was another chess piece. Fourth, Harry said, I want to visit the Peverell Vault. Ragnok raised an eyebrow, an impressive feat given goblin facial architecture. Now. The cart ride to the Peverell Vault took nearly 20 minutes, which was absurd given how fast goblin carts moved. They went down, deeper than Harry had ever been, deeper than the Lestrange vault he'd broken into, deeper than he'd thought the tunnels went. The air changed. It went from cool to cold to something that wasn't really temperature at all but felt like pressure, like the weight of all that stone and earth and time was pressing against his skin. The cart stopped in front of a door that was not a door. It was a wall of raw rock with a handprint carved into it at chest height, and when Harry pressed his palm against it, the Peverell ring flared with heat and the rock simply opened. Not swung, not slid. It opened like a mouth, and beyond was darkness. I will wait here, Ragnok said. The deep vaults do not welcome goblins. This is not an insult, it is a fact of the magic. These vaults were built before our treaty with wizardkind, by wizards who did not trust anyone. Harry nodded, conjured a ball of light, wandlessly, and it came so easily now that it almost startled him, and walked inside. The vault was enormous. The light expanded to fill the space, and Harry's breath caught, because he'd been in the Potter Vault and the Lestrange Vault and he'd thought he understood what wizard wealth looked like, but this was something else entirely. Gold, yes, piles of it, though less than the Potter Vault. But the gold wasn't the point. The point was everything else. Books. Hundreds of them, stacked on stone shelves that lined the curved walls, their spines cracked and faded but their magic still humming. Harry could feel them like heat sources, each one radiating some kind of preserved enchantment that had kept them intact for centuries. Weapons. A rack of them against one wall, swords, a staff, several objects Harry couldn't identify. One sword in particular caught his eye. It was simpler than the sword of Gryffindor, with a dark blade and a hilt wrapped in something that might have been dragon leather, and when Harry reached for it, the Peverell ring pulsed warmly, and the sword seemed to lean into his hand. "Right," Harry murmured, wrapping his fingers around the grip. It fit like it had been made for him, which, given the blood magic involved, it probably had been. The blade was light, balanced, and thrumming with enchantments so old they'd become part of the metal itself. But the thing that stopped him, the thing that made him stand very still in the center of that ancient vault with dust motes swirling through his conjured light, was the cloak. There was a cloak draped over a stone mannequin at the back of the vault, and it was not his invisibility cloak. It was something else. Darker. Heavier. Woven from material that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. And pinned to its collar was a note, written in a hand so old the ink had turned brown, that read, "For the last lord. When three become one." Harry touched the cloak and felt something slot into place inside his chest, not painfully, but with the profound click of a key turning in a lock that had been waiting centuries to be opened. The Peverell ring blazed. The cloak dissolved off the mannequin and reformed around his shoulders, and for a moment, just a moment, Harry felt what the Peverell line had been, what they had known, what they had been capable of before the centuries diluted their blood and scattered their descendants into obscurity. Death was not their enemy. Death was their colleague. He left the vault carrying the sword, wearing the cloak, and knowing things he hadn't known 20 minutes ago, not because the items had told him, exactly, but because claiming them had unlocked something in his own blood, like a library card for knowledge that had been encoded into his DNA and waiting for the right magical trigger. He knew, for instance, that Dumbledore was aware of the Peverell vault. That the old man had spent decades trying to access it. That the reason Dumbledore had been so interested in the Deathly Hallows wasn't academic curiosity but greed. The Peverell vault, according to the family magic now whispering through Harry's blood, contained knowledge of magical disciplines that had been lost for 400 years. He knew other things too. He knew that the killing curse, Voldemort's signature, the spell that had defined Harry's life, had been invented by a Peverell. Not as a weapon of murder, but as a mercy, a way to separate soul from body painlessly, originally designed for the dying. The darkest curse in the wizarding world had started as an act of compassion, and it had taken centuries of misuse to twist it into what it was now. He knew that the Resurrection Stone, the Elder Wand, and the Cloak of Invisibility were not just artifacts but keys, 3 parts of a system the Peverell brothers had designed together, a system meant to give their descendants power over the boundary between life and death. Not to conquer death. To understand it. Harry climbed back into the cart, and Ragnok looked at the sword and the cloak and the expression on Harry's face and said, very quietly, "Ah." "Yeah," Harry said. "The last Lord Peverell." "Apparently." They rode back up in silence. When they returned to Ragnok's office, the certified audit copies were waiting, 3 of them, bound in leather and sealed with goblin wax that couldn't be forged or tampered with. "One more thing," Harry said, standing at the door with the audit tucked under his arm and the Peverell sword at his hip and a cloak that seemed to make shadows lean toward him. "Has Dumbledore been notified of my visit?" "Gringotts does not notify third parties of client business," Ragnok said. "However, the old man has monitoring charms on several of your vaults, illegally, I should note, and it is likely he was alerted the moment you claimed your lordships. The magical signature of 3 simultaneous house claims would be difficult to miss for someone attuned to such things." "Good," Harry said. He wanted Dumbledore to know. He wanted the old man to feel the bottom drop out of his stomach the way Harry's had when he'd read that audit. He wanted Dumbledore to sit in his office with his lemon drops and his spinning silver instruments and feel, for the first time in decades, what it was like to be afraid. "Lord Potter-Black-Peverell," Ragnok said, standing as Harry turned to leave. "The Goblin Nation has long memories. Your family's account with us predates the Ministry of Magic. We do not forget debts, ours or others. If you intend to pursue this matter, you will find that Gringotts remembers who its friends are." "I intend to pursue it," Harry said, "all the way to the end." He walked out of Gringotts into a dawn that was just beginning to crack gold and pink across the London skyline. Diagon Alley was waking up, a shopkeeper sweeping her front step, an early delivery owl winging toward the Owl Emporium, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery 3 doors down from Ollivander's. The world looked exactly the same as it had 6 hours ago, and Harry marveled at that, because he was not the same person at all. He operat. He'd never done it before, not legally, not intentionally, not without the supervision of an instructor. But the knowledge was there, unlocked by the same blood magic that had taught him about the Peverell line, and his magic responded to his intent with a ferocity that compressed the world into a tube of rushing darkness and spat him out exactly where he wanted to be. The gates of Hogwarts. It was 6:15 in the morning. The castle rose against the lightning sky like something out of a painting, all towers and turrets and the promise of magic, and Harry had loved this place once, loved it simply and completely, the way a child loves the first home that ever felt like home. He didn't feel simple about it anymore. The gates recognized the lordship rings and swung open without protest. The wards washed over him as he walked through, and he felt them now in a way he never had before, layers of enchantment going back 1,000 years, maintained by the headmaster but owned, technically, by the Hogwarts Board of Governors, which answered to the Wizengamot, on which Harry now held 3 seats. The castle was mostly empty, summer holidays, but not deserted. Dumbledore lived here year-round, and several of the other professors maintained summer residences in the castle. Harry could feel them, distantly, like candle flames scattered through the vast stone structure. The brightest flame, the most powerful, was exactly where he expected it to be. He climbed the stairs to the headmaster's office. The gargoyle took one look at him and leaped aside without being given a password, which told Harry something about how the castle's magic was reacting to his new status. The spiral staircase carried him upward, and he didn't knock on the door at the top. He pushed it open and walked in. Albus Dumbledore was standing behind his desk, and he was not twinkling. Harry had seen Dumbledore in many states over the years, amused, grave, sad, mysterious, and once, memorably, furious in the Ministry atrium while dueling Voldemort. But he had never seen this expression. Dumbledore looked like a man who had been awake for several hours, which he probably had, and who had spent those hours watching his very careful, very elaborate house of cards begin to tremble. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "I had hoped we might speak before what?" Harry said, and his voice was the cold flat thing from Gringotts, the voice that didn't sound like him and sounded exactly like him at the same time. "Before I found out. Before I claimed what's mine. Before I read the audit." Dumbledore's eyes moved to the sword at Harry's hip. To the cloak on his shoulders. To the rings on Harry's fingers. And something shifted in that ancient, brilliant face, not quite fear, but the dawning recognition that the situation had moved beyond his ability to control it with words alone. "You went to the Peverell vault," Dumbledore said softly. "Sit down, Professor." To Harry's mild surprise, Dumbledore sat. Not because he was afraid, Harry didn't think the old man was physically afraid of much, but because he was recalculating, and Dumbledore calculated best when he was still. Harry remained standing. He set the certified Gringotts audit on the desk between them, the goblin wax seals glinting in the early morning light that streamed through the tall office windows. 973,000 galleons, Harry said. Stolen from the Potter vault over 15 years. Using a magical guardianship you obtained illegally after sealing my parents' will, which you knew named Sirius Black as my guardian. You put me with the Dursleys against my parents' explicit, documented wishes. You took my money. You filed a marriage contract without my knowledge. You hid properties from me, including a manor house protected by a Fidelius charm for which you are the secret keeper. Harry paused, not for effect, but because his magic was pressing against his skin and he needed a moment to keep it from blowing out the windows. Tell me why. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful and sad and, Harry thought, almost certainly calculated to produce exactly that impression. The blood wards, Dumbledore said. Your mother's sacrifice created a protection tied to her blood. Petunia Dursley was the only living blood relative who could anchor those wards. Placing you there was not cruelty, Harry, it was survival. Every other option left you vulnerable to Voldemort's remaining followers. My parents will says otherwise. They knew about the blood wards. They chose differently. Your parents were young and idealistic. They didn't understand, don't. Harry's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare tell me my parents didn't understand. They died fighting Voldemort. They died because you told them the prophecy, because you set them up as targets, because you knew one of them would have to die to create the protection you needed for your weapon. That's what I am to you. That's what I've always been. Dumbledore's face went very still. The money, Harry continued. Explain the money. War is expensive, Harry. The Order needed funding. The Ministry was compromised. Every galleon I took went toward the fight against Voldemort, toward protecting you, protecting the wizarding world. 80,000 went to your personal vault. Dumbledore blinked. Expenses. Travel. Maintaining safe houses. I assure you, I never spent a canute of your money on personal luxury. It wasn't your money to spend at all. Harry leaned forward, palms on the desk, and he could see his own reflection in Dumbledore's half-moon spectacles, a young man with green eyes that were colder than they'd ever been. You stole nearly 1 million galleons from an orphan you'd placed in an abusive home. You paid people to monitor me. You filed a marriage contract for a 14-year-old boy. And you sit here and tell me it was for the greater good? Something flashed in Dumbledore's eyes at those words. Something raw and old and pained. I have never used that phrase to justify, you didn't have to say it. You lived it. Every decision you made about my life was made without my consent, and every single one served your agenda. Not mine. Not my parents'. Yours. Dumbledore stood. He was taller than Harry, and in that moment, with the morning light behind him and his magic pressing outward like a wave, he looked every inch the most powerful wizard in the world. The air in the office went heavy. Fawkes stirred on his perch, a low trill of concern. You are angry, Dumbledore said. You have every right to be. But you do not understand the full picture. Voldemort is not dead. He will return to full strength. The Horcruxes, I know about the Horcruxes. That stopped Dumbledore cold. Genuinely cold, Harry watched the blood drain from his face. Oh yes, Harry said, and smiled, and it was not a nice smile. The Peverell vault is full of interesting books, Professor. The Peverells invented the killing curse, did you know that? They understood the soul, life, death, and the boundaries between them better than anyone in history. I've been a Peverell Lord for about 5 hours and I already know more about Horcruxes than you've told me in 6 years. Including the one you never planned to tell me about. He tapped his scar. The one in my head. Dumbledore sat down again. Slowly, this time, like a man suddenly aware of his age. You were going to let me die, Harry said. Walk me to the slaughter like a pig on a leash, because you couldn't figure out another way to get the fragment out. That was your plan. Your grand, compassionate, greater good plan. Raise the weapon, aim the weapon, use the weapon, sacrifice the weapon. There was no other way. There are 17 other ways documented in the Peverell Library. 17 methods of Horcrux extraction developed over 3 centuries by people who actually understood the magic instead of just fearing it. You never looked because you never had access to that vault, and you assumed no one else would either. Harry straightened up. You were wrong. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. Dumbledore looked old. Not the theatrical, comfortable oldness he usually projected, the kind that made you think of grandfathers and wisdom and sweets after dinner. He looked old. Tired. Caught. What do you intend to do? Dumbledore asked. I intend to take back what's mine. My money. My houses. My seats on the Wizengamot. My life. And then I intend to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes using methods that don't require me to die, win the war that you've been losing for 20 years, and rebuild the wizarding world that your generation burned down. Harry picked up the audit. I'm giving you one chance, Professor. 1. Come clean publicly. Resign your positions. Return what you can. Face the Wizengamot and answer for what you've done. If you do that, if you show even a fraction of the courage you've demanded from everyone else, I'll argue for leniency. And if I don't? Harry met his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the brush of legitimacy. The Peverell cloak was doing something, shielding his mind with the same ancient magic that shielded the dead from the living. His thoughts were his own. If you don't, Harry said, I'll destroy you. Politically, financially, and publicly. Not because I want to. Because you didn't leave me any choice. Just like you never left me any choice about anything. He turned and walked toward the door. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was barely above a whisper. I did care for you. Whatever else you believe, I did care. Harry stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. That's what makes it worse, he said. He walked down the spiral staircase, through the corridors of the castle that had been his home for 6 years, past the sleeping portraits and the whispering suits of armor and the ghosts who drifted through walls and watched him with surprised, silvery eyes. Professor McGonagall was coming up the main staircase as he was going down. She stopped dead at the sight of him, the rings, the sword, the cloak that pooled shadows at his feet. Potter? What on earth, Professor, Harry said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever had reason to believe that Dumbledore was misusing his position as my magical guardian? McGonagall's face went through about 7 expressions in 3 seconds. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I raised concerns, she said finally. When you were placed with the Dursleys. I watched them for a day, and I told Albus they were the worst sort of muggles. He overruled me. Did he tell you my parents will name Sirius Black as guardian? The color drained from her face. No, she whispered. No, he told me there was no will. There was a will. He sealed it. I have proof. Harry held up the audit, and McGonagall stared at it like it was a live snake. I'm going to be calling an emergency session of the Wizengamot within the week. I'm going to need allies, Professor. People who care more about doing right than about protecting Albus Dumbledore's legacy. McGonagall drew herself up to her full height. Her eyes were bright and hard and, Harry realized, absolutely furious, not at him. You'll have me, she said. Whatever you need. Harry nodded. He walked past her, down the steps, out through the great oak doors and across the grounds where the morning was now fully underway, golden and warm, the lake glittering in the forbidden forest rustling with hidden life. He apparat from the gates, smooth this time, controlled, his magic responding to his will like it was glad to finally have clear instructions, and landed on the doorstep of number 12, Grimmauld Place. The door opened for him. The ward sang in recognition of the Black Lord ring, and the house itself seemed to shudder and wake, cobwebs dissolving, lights flickering on, the portrait of Walburga Black starting to scream and then cutting off mid-shriek as Harry's ring pulsed and silenced her permanently. He stood in the hallway of the house Sirius had left him, surrounded by dust and dark magic and the remnants of a family that had destroyed itself, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope he'd carried around for years like a candle flame in a hurricane. Something sturdier. Something with teeth. He had the truth. He had the evidence. He had the power and the position and the will to use them. Voldemort was still out there, still dangerous, still the primary threat. Harry hadn't forgotten that, would never forget that. But the war wasn't just against the Dark Lord anymore. It was against the rot in the system that had allowed one man to steal a child's inheritance, seal a dead couple's wishes, and shape an orphan into a weapon, all while being celebrated as the greatest wizard of the age. Harry sat down at the kitchen table of Grimmauld Place, spread the audit in front of him, and began to plan. He had 3 Wizengamot seats to activate. He had allies to gather. He had a corrupt old man to bring to justice and a dark lord to kill and a whole world to prove wrong about who Harry Potter was and what Harry Potter was capable of. Somewhere out in the brightening morning, Albus Dumbledore was sitting in his office, and for the first time in a very long time, the greatest chess player in the wizarding world had discovered he was not the only one with a board. Chapter 2, The weight of houses. The kitchen of Grimmauld Place had never been warm, but by mid-morning Harry had forced the ancient stove into cooperation and there was tea, strong, slightly bitter, the kind that strips the fog out of your head and replaces it with clarity. He sat at the long table with the audit spread before him, 3 copies of the Gringotts certification, a quill, and a list he'd been building since dawn. The list had 2 columns. One was labeled Allies. The other was labeled Unknowns. He didn't have a column for enemies, he already knew who those were. Under Allies he'd written, McGonagall. Gringotts. Neville, probably. Luna, almost certainly. Under Unknowns, Hermione. Ron. The rest of the Weasleys. Tonks. Lupin. The Order. He stared at the Unknowns column and felt the ache of it. These were people he loved, some of them, anyway, and he was about to drop a bomb into the center of their world. Some of them would stand with him. Some wouldn't. And some, he suspected, already knew more than they'd ever admitted. A knock at the front door pulled him out of his thoughts. Not a tentative knock, 3 sharp raps, the kind made by someone who expected to be let in. Harry drew his wand out of habit, then paused and sheathed it again. The wards would have told him if anyone hostile was on the doorstep, and what he felt instead was a magical signature he recognized, bright, fierce, and slightly chaotic. He opened the door to find Neville Longbottom standing on the step, looking like he'd dressed in a hurry and operatte without fully planning his destination. His shirt was buttoned wrong. His wand was in his hand. And his face held an expression Harry had only seen once before, in the Department of Mysteries, when Neville had picked up his broken wand and kept fighting with a shattered nose and blood in his eyes. You claimed 3 lordships at 2 in the morning and the magical registries lit up like Christmas at the Ministry, Neville said. I've been monitoring them since Gran told me to start paying attention to house politics last year. Want to tell me what's going on, or should I guess? Harry stepped aside. Come in. There's tea. Neville came in, and Harry watched him take in the changes. The house was already responding to its new lord, cleaning itself in fits and starts, the oppressive darkness lifting like a headache slowly fading. Neville said nothing about any of it. He sat at the kitchen table, accepted the tea Harry poured him, and waited. Harry slid the audit across to him. Neville read it. He read it slowly, carefully, the way someone reads a document when they understand that it's going to change things. His face went through a controlled series of shifts, surprise, confusion, anger, more anger, a deeper anger that settled into his bones and stayed there. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. Dumbledore did this. Every Canute. 15 years. Neville's hand tightened on his teacup. My Gran has been saying for years that something was wrong with the Potter accounts. She managed the Longbottom estate while I was underage and she has a sense for these things. She said the numbers never added up, that a family as old as the Potters should have had 3 times what your trust vault showed. Everyone told her she was being paranoid. She wasn't. No. Neville set down his tea. Harry, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Go ahead. When I turned 17 in June, Gran had me do a full audit of the Longbottom vaults. She'd been pushing for it since 5th year, since the Ministry battle, since she realized I was going to be a target regardless of whether I kept my head down. We found discrepancies. Smaller than yours, much smaller. Around 40,000 galleons redirected over 12 years, starting when my parents were attacked. The authorization trail led to the same place. He paused. The Chief Warlock's discretionary authority. Harry felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not surprise, he was past surprise, but a deepening of the pattern, a widening of the scope that told him this wasn't just about one orphan's trust fund. This was systematic. Dumbledore robbed you too, Harry said. He robbed the Longbottom estate under a care of wards provision that Gran never authorized. She's been trying to get answers from the Ministry for 2 years and kept hitting walls, sealed records, classified authorizations, bureaucrats who suddenly couldn't find the paperwork. Neville's jaw set. She was ready to go to the Wizengamot herself, but she only holds the Longbottom seat in Regency. When I claim it, claim it. Neville blinked. Claim it, Harry said again. Today. Go to Gringotts, do the blood verification, claim the Longbottom lordship, and get your own certified audit. Then we walk into the Wizengamot together, for seats between us, and we tear the roof off. Something changed in Neville's face. Not a dramatic transformation, Neville wasn't the type. But there was a settling, a solidity, like a foundation being poured. He'd walked in as Harry's friend who'd heard something alarming. He was becoming something else. An ally with his own stake in the fight. Gran is going to be absolutely terrifying about this, Neville said, almost to himself. She's wanted to go after Dumbledore for years. Good. I need terrifying on my side. Neville stood, drained his tea, and set the cup down with a precise click. Give me 3 hours. I'll be back with the Longbottom audit and the ring. He disapparated from the kitchen, which should have been impossible inside the Black family wards, but Harry had felt the house adjust its protections to welcome Neville the moment he decided the young man was an ally. The wards were learning his intentions, responding to them, becoming an extension of his will. It was the kind of power that came with lordship, the kind Dumbledore had used against Harry for 16 years and never told him about. Harry spent the 3 hours working. He wrote letters, carefully worded, magically sealed, each one tailored to its recipient. To Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a formal notification of his intent to bring charges of line theft against Albus Dumbledore in the Wizengamot, along with a summary of the Gringotts audit findings. He chose Bones because she was fair, because she was rigorous, and because she had no known ties to either Dumbledore's inner circle or the Death Eaters. She was one of the few people in the Ministry who might actually care about the law. To Augusta Longbottom, a personal note explaining the situation and asking for her support, along with a full copy of the Potter audit, since Neville would be arriving with his own story within the hour. To the Daily Prophet, not a letter but a formal legal notice, filed under the public disclosure provisions of the Wizengamot Charter, announcing Lord Potter-Black-Peverell's intention to call an emergency session. This would be published in tomorrow's paper whether anyone at the Prophet liked it or not. Harry could have gone to them with the full story and watched the feeding frenzy, but he didn't want a media circus. He wanted a courtroom. He was sealing the last letter when a silvery lynx Patronus floated through the wall and spoke in Kingsley Shacklebolt's deep voice, "Harry. I've heard rumors about what happened at Gringotts. We need to talk. I'm not your enemy." Harry stared at the fading Patronus. Kingsley was Order of the Phoenix. Kingsley was Dumbledore's man. But Kingsley was also an Auror, a real one, not a politician with a badge, and he'd fought beside Harry more than once. He sent a Patronus back, his stag, and wasn't it interesting how much brighter it was now, how much more solid, as if it had been waiting for him to stop being diminished before it could show its full strength. Grimmauld Place. Come alone. No tricks. Kingsley arrived 20 minutes later, ducking through the doorway with the careful grace of a very large man in a very old house. He took one look at Harry, really looked, the way an Auror looks at a crime scene, and let out a slow breath. "You've claimed the lordships. All 3. And the audit?" Harry gestured to the table. Kingsley read it standing up, and his face did something complicated, professional control warring with personal fury. When he finished, he set the document down with exaggerated care, as if he was afraid of what his hands might do if they weren't being gentle. I have to be honest with you, Kingsley said. I knew some of this. Harry's wand was in his hand before he thought about it, not aimed at Kingsley, but present, a statement of fact. Not the specifics, Kingsley said, raising his hands slowly. Not the amount, not the marriage contract, not the will. But I've worked security details on the Potter accounts as part of order business, and the money flow didn't add up. I asked Dumbledore about it. Once. He told me it was war funding, untraceable, deniable, necessary. I accepted that because I was a soldier and he was my commander, and in wartime, you don't always question the supply chain. He met Harry's eyes. That was a mistake. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. What are you going to do about it? Kingsley didn't hesitate. I'm a senior Auror. If you file formal charges with the DMLE, which it looks like you're doing, those charges land on Amelia Bones's desk and she assigns an investigator. I'm going to make sure that investigator is me. Not because I want to protect Dumbledore, because I want to make sure the investigation is done right, by someone who already has context and won't be intimidated. Harry studied him for a long moment. The Peverell cloak was still on his shoulders, and through it, he could feel, not Kingsley's thoughts, but his intent. His magical resonance. It was steady, honest, and angry in the way that righteous people get angry, not explosive, but permanent. All right, Harry said. But Kingsley, if you're playing both sides, if you run back to Dumbledore with my strategy, I will find out. And I won't be forgiving about it. Understood. Kingsley offered his hand, and they shook, and there was magic in it, a trace of the old binding customs, a handshake between a lord of 3 houses and a sworn officer of the law that carried more weight than a casual gesture. After Kingsley left, Harry sat in the sudden quiet and let himself feel the exhaustion. He'd been awake for over 30 hours. His magic was still burning hot and steady, but his body was 17 years old and running on tea and adrenaline, and at some point, physics was going to win the argument with willpower. He gave himself 10 minutes. He sat in the kitchen of the house his godfather had left him, and he let the grief come, not for the money, not for the manipulation, but for the years. The years at Privet Drive that his parents had begged to prevent. The years at Hogwarts where he'd trusted the wrong man. The years Sirius spent in Azkaban while his name was right there in the Potter will, listed as Harry's rightful guardian, a document that would have freed him a decade before his escape. Sirius had died never knowing that the proof of his intended role in Harry's life existed. Dumbledore had possessed that proof the entire time. Harry pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed until the grief settled into something he could carry, and then he stood up and went back to work, because the dead didn't need his tears. They needed his action. Neville returned exactly 3 hours later, and he was not alone. Augusta Longbottom swept into Grimmauld Place like a warship entering harbor, tall, imperious, wearing her signature vulture hat and an expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. Behind her came Neville, wearing the Longbottom Lord's ring on his right hand and carrying his own Gringotts audit, and behind Neville came someone Harry had not expected at all. Daphne Greengrass closed the front door behind her with a quiet click and stood in the hallway of the most ancient and noble house of Black with the poise of someone who had been trained since birth to be comfortable in exactly this kind of environment. She was tall, Harry's height, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical knot and blue eyes that assessed everything without revealing anything. She wore simple robes in charcoal gray, no jewelry except for a single ring on her left hand that bore the Greengrass family crest, and she carried a leather portfolio that looked like it contained either legal briefs or someone's doom. Possibly both. Before you ask, Neville said, catching Harry's expression, she came to Gringotts while I was doing my verification. She's been doing her own research into financial irregularities involving the Chief Warlock's office for the past year. When she saw me claiming the Longbottom Lordship and putting 2 and 2 together, she approached me. I vetted her story. It checks out. Harry looked at Daphne Greengrass. She looked back. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, she said. Her voice was cool, precise, and carried a faint edge of dry humor. I'm going to guess you have questions about why a Slytherin is standing in your hallway. The thought crossed my mind. Then let me save us both some time. She opened her portfolio and set a sheaf of parchment on the hallway table. My father, Cyrus Greengrass, has been fighting a legal battle with the Chief Warlock's office for 3 years. The Greengrass family holds investments in several potion ingredient suppliers that were targeted by ministry regulations drafted by officials who, according to our forensic accountants, received substantial financial incentives from a fund controlled by Albus Dumbledore. When my father tried to challenge the regulations through the Wizengamot, his motion was blocked by the Chief Warlock using procedural authority. When he tried to go through the courts, the case was assigned to a judge who owed Dumbledore a personal favor. Our family has lost approximately 200,000 galleons in business value due to these regulations. And you want payback, Harry said. I want justice, she corrected, and there was heat under the ice for the first time. Payback would be personal. Justice is structural. Dumbledore hasn't just stolen from the Potters and the Longbottoms, he's built a system of financial and political control that extends through the Ministry, the Wizengamot, and half the institutions in magical Britain. He uses it to advance his agenda, reward his allies, and crush anyone who challenges him. He's been doing it for decades, and no one's been able to touch him because he controls the levers that are supposed to provide oversight. She tapped her portfolio. I have documentation. 3 years of my father's legal battles, financial analysis, ministry correspondence, everything you'd need to show that the Potter theft isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. Augusta Longbottom, who had been listening to all of this with the expression of a hawk watching a field mouse, spoke for the first time. The girl is right, Lord Potter. I've known Albus Dumbledore for 60 years, and I've watched him accumulate power the way other men accumulate galleons, quietly, systematically, always with a noble excuse. He sealed my daughter-in-law's medical records when I tried to get a second opinion on Frank and Alice's treatment. Told me it was for their protection. Told me I was grieving and not thinking clearly. Her voice could have etched glass. I have been thinking clearly for 16 years, and I am very, very finished waiting. Harry looked at the three of them, Neville, steady and resolute, Augusta, a force of nature in a vulture hat, Daphne, cool-eyed and armed with evidence. Something loosened in his chest. He'd walked into Gringotts alone. He wasn't alone anymore. Sit down, he said. All of you. We have a lot to plan and not much time. They convened in the kitchen, and over the next 2 hours, the four of them built the framework of what Harry was starting to think of not as a legal challenge but as a siege. Daphne was, it turned out, brilliant at this. She'd been studying pureblood law and Wizengamot procedure since she was 14, not out of academic interest but out of necessity, watching her father's legal battles and learning every loophole, every precedent, every obscure clause that might be useful. She spread her parchments across the table and walked them through the strategy with the precision of a surgeon. The Wizengamot has 3 mechanisms for emergency sessions, she said. The first is a call from the Minister for Magic, which we won't get. Scrimgeour is a political animal and he won't move against Dumbledore without absolute certainty of winning. The second is a call from the Chief Warlock himself, which obviously isn't happening. The third is a petition signed by holders of no fewer than 5 hereditary seats. I hold 3, Harry said. Neville holds 1. That's 4. The Greengrass seat makes 5. My father will sign, and I'll hold his proxy while he manages the business implications. She met Harry's eyes. This is the price of my help, Lord Potter. The Greengrass seat at the table. Not as a subordinate. As an equal partner in the coalition. Harry didn't have to think about it. Done. Augusta nodded approvingly. Smart girl. You'll go far. I intend to. They drafted the petition that afternoon. It was a masterwork of legal language. Daphne wrote most of it, with Augusta contributing decades of institutional knowledge and Neville occasionally asking the kind of straightforward questions that cut through complexity like a hot knife. Harry signed last, and when his magic touched the parchment through the 3 lordship rings, the document blazed with golden light that made everyone at the table shield their eyes. 3 houses at once, Augusta murmured, looking at the still glowing signatures. That hasn't happened in living memory. It's happening now, Harry said. They sent the petition by Goblin courier to the Wizengamot's clerk of sessions, a functionary whose job it was to process exactly these kinds of filings and who, according to Augusta, was one of the few people in the building who couldn't be bribed, threatened, or confounded, not because of unusual moral fortitude, but because he was a vampire, and vampires regarded bureaucratic procedure as a sacred calling. The emergency session was set for 2 days' time. 48 hours to prepare, to gather evidence, to shore up alliances, and to brace for the inevitable counterattack. It came faster than Harry expected. He was eating dinner, actual food, which Neville had insisted on cooking because, you can't fight the establishment on an empty stomach, Harry, my gran says so and she's always right, when the fireplace in the kitchen roared green and 2 heads appeared in the flames simultaneously, which should have been impossible but was very Ron and Hermione. Harry. Hermione's face was flushed with firelight and agitation. We just got an owl from Professor Dumbledore saying that you were, he said you'd been compromised, that someone had used dark magic to come through, Harry said. Both of you. We need to talk in person. They tumbled out of the flue together, ash-covered and wide-eyed, and Harry saw them take in the scene, the kitchen that was no longer grim, the papers spread across the table, Neville eating roast chicken in the corner, and Harry himself, wearing 3 lordship rings and a cloak that made shadows pool at his feet like water. Hermione's eyes went first to the rings. Then to the Gringotts seals on the documents. Then back to Harry's face, and he could see the gears turning behind her eyes. She was already processing, already cataloguing, already halfway to a conclusion. Ron was looking at the sword propped against the wall. All right, Ron said slowly. That's not the sword of Gryffindor. No, it isn't. And those rings mean what I think they mean. Probably. Ron sat down at the table, pulled a piece of chicken off Neville's plate without asking. Neville didn't even react, which told Harry they'd reached some unspoken understanding, and said, Dumbledore told my mum you'd gone dark. She's been crying for 3 hours. Dad's trying to calm her down but he's worried too. Percy's already drafting something for the minister. Of course he is, Harry said tiredly. What happened? Hermione asked, and her voice was careful, balanced, not accusatory, not blindly accepting. Asking. Harry told them. Not everything, not the Peverell vault, not the Horcruxes, but the audit, the numbers, the sealed will, the marriage contract, the payments to the Weasley family coded as subject monitoring and companionship services. The silence that followed was brutal. Ron's face went white. Then red. Then a shade of purple Harry had never seen on a human being before. He stood up, knocked his chair over, and said in a voice that shook like a bridge in a gale, he paid my family to be your friend. He paid your family something, Harry said carefully. The money was routed through a fund called the Pruitt Memorial, your mum's family name. It's possible they thought it was a legitimate inheritance or charitable distribution. I don't know what they knew. Mum would never, Ron stopped. Swallowed. Started again. Mum wouldn't take money to spy on you. She wouldn't. She loved you. She loves you. I believe that, Harry said, and he meant it. But someone was writing the checks, Ron, and it wasn't your mum's dead uncles. Hermione had picked up the audit while Harry was talking and was reading it with the focused intensity she usually reserved for textbooks that had personally offended her. Her lips moved silently as she processed the numbers, the transfer codes, the legal implications. When she looked up, her eyes were bright and wet. This is real, she said. This is. Harry, do you understand how bad this is? Under the sacred trust provisions, a guardian who misappropriates more than 10,000 galleons from a ward's estate commits a Class 1 felony. The mandatory sentence is, life in Azkaban, Harry said. I know. And the sealed will, Harry, that's not just fraud. That's conspiracy to pervert the course of magical justice. That affected Sirius's case. If the will had been public record, if anyone had known your parents had named him guardian, the entire narrative about him being a Death Eater would have been undermined. It would have triggered questions, investigations, he might have gotten a trial, Harry said quietly. Yeah. I've thought about that. Ron sat down. His face was still that terrible color, but his eyes had cleared. He looked at Harry across the table with an expression that was stripped of everything except raw, painful honesty. What do you need? Ron asked. From me. Right now. What do you need? Harry felt something crack in his chest, not painfully, but like a wall breaking, a dam releasing. He'd been braced for Ron to defend Dumbledore, to choose the authority figure, to retreat into the comfortable story that the great wizard had a plan and everything would be fine. Instead, Ron was sitting across from him asking what he needed, and it was so purely Ron, loyal, direct, ready to fight, that Harry nearly laughed. I need to know if your family is going to come after me, Harry said. Because I'm going to the Wizengamot in 2 days and I'm going to lay all of this out in public, including the payments. If your parents decide to side with Dumbledore, I'll talk to them, Ron said. Tonight. Dad first, he's the reasonable one, and Mum will listen to him even when she won't listen to anyone else. I'll show them the audit. He paused. Can I take a copy? Harry slid one across the table. Ron picked it up and held it like it weighed 100 pounds. Harry. I need you to know, I was never paid to be your friend. I didn't even know about this money. If my parents knew, they didn't tell us, and I would have been your friend for free. I would have been your friend if you were the poorest bloke in school. You know that, right? I know that, Harry said. That's why you're here and not everyone else. Ron nodded once, sharply, and turned to the fireplace. Then he stopped, turned back, and said, the marriage contract. To Ginny. Annulled. As of 5 o'clock this morning. Did Ginny know about it? I have no idea. I don't think so, but I don't know. Something fierce and protective crossed Ron's face, not for his sister's feelings, but for her autonomy. I'll find out. And if Dumbledore set my sister up as part of some breeding program for his pet hero, I swear to Merlin, Harry, I'll help you burn him myself. He stepped into the green flames and was gone. Hermione was still at the table. She hadn't moved. You're not surprised enough, Harry said. She flinched. What? You're angry and you're upset, but you're not surprised. Not the way you should be if this is completely new information. Hermione's hands twisted in her lap. Harry, I don't. Hermione. She looked up, and the guilt on her face hit Harry like a bludger. 3rd year, she said. When I had the time turner. I was in the library late, really late, past midnight, and I found a reference in a legal index to a sealed document connected to the Potter estate. I asked Dumbledore about it. He told me it was a routine administrative sealing and that investigating it further would put you at risk. She swallowed. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He was Dumbledore. And after that? I kept noticing things. Small things. The way he always knew where you were, even when you were using the cloak. The way he'd steer conversations, ours, the orders, away from questions about your finances or your family. When you inherited from Sirius and he didn't mention the Black Lordship at all, I thought it was strange, but I told myself there must be a reason. Her voice cracked. I rationalized it. Every single time, I rationalized it, because the alternative was too horrible. Harry sat with that for a long moment. He wanted to be angry. Part of him was. But the larger part, the part that had grown up with nothing and no one and had learned the hard way that people are complicated, that part understood. Hermione had been a child, and children trust the adults who are supposed to protect them. That was the whole point. That was what Dumbledore had weaponized. "You're here now," Harry said. "That's what matters." Hermione wiped her eyes fiercely, straightened in her chair, and pulled the audit toward her with the expression of someone about to go to war using the only weapon she'd ever needed, information. "Right. So. The Wizengamot session. Tell me everything about the procedural framework and I'll have a litigation strategy mapped out by morning." Neville, who had been quietly eating his chicken throughout all of this, looked at Harry and raised his eyebrows as if to say see. Harry allowed himself a small, tired smile. The next 48 hours were the most productive and the most exhausting of Harry's life, and that was saying something for a person who'd once lived an entire year in a tent while hunting pieces of a Dark Lord's soul. Well, he hadn't done that yet, technically. That was the plan he was trying to avoid. The new plan was considerably more elegant. The coalition, Harry, Neville, Daphne, Augusta, Hermione as chief researcher, and Ron operating as intelligence and family liaison, worked out of Grimmauld Place with a focus and efficiency that would have impressed a military staff. Augusta handled the political outreach, spending hours on the Fleur network calling in decades of favors and alliances. Daphne managed the legal strategy, drafting the formal charges and building the procedural framework for the session. Neville coordinated with Gringotts, working with Ragnok's office to prepare the Goblins' testimony, because Ragnok had made it clear that the Goblin Nation intended to participate, and when goblins participated in legal proceedings, they brought evidence that was irrefutable by magical law. Hermione did what Hermione always did, she buried herself in research and emerged with weapons. She found 17 precedents for line theft charges in Wizengamot history. She found the specific statutes that govern the sacred trust of guardianship. She found a loophole in the Wizengamot's rules of evidence that would allow Goblin-certified financial records to be entered into the record without the standard 3-day review period, on the grounds that Goblin accounting magic was considered inherently more reliable than wizard truth verification charms. "It's because goblins literally cannot falsify their own ledgers," Hermione explained, pushing her hair out of her face at 2 in the morning. "The accounting magic they use is bound to their blood. If a goblin tries to create a false record, the magic kills them. It's been that way since the Goblin Accords of 1312. The Wizengamot recognized it as infallible evidence in 1547 and has never revoked that recognition." "Brilliant," Neville said. "It's just research," Hermione said, but she was blushing. Ron came back the next day with news. He'd talked to his parents, both of them, and the result was complicated. "Dad didn't know about the payments," Ron said, sitting heavily in the kitchen chair. He's devastated, Harry. He went through every bank statement he could find, and the Pruitt memorial deposits were there. Mom thought they were from an old family trust that had been dormant. She never questioned it because her uncles had been wealthy before they died in the First War, and she assumed it was just their estate finally being distributed. She cried for about 6 hours straight. And now she wants to march to Hogwarts and curse Dumbledore into next century. Dad talked her down, but barely. They want to come to the Wizengamot session. They want to testify. Harry let out a breath. Good. That's good. Ginny's a different situation. Ron's face tightened. She didn't know about the marriage contract. When I told her, she went dead quiet for about 10 minutes and then blew up every window in the burrow. Mom had to hit her with a calming charm. He paused. She wants to talk to you. But she also said, and I'm quoting directly, tell him I'm furious at Dumbledore, not at him, and if he thinks this changes anything between us, I'll hex him into next week and then we'll talk about it like adults. So. That's Ginny. Harry almost laughed. Almost. Tell her I'll talk to her after the session. One war at a time. The night before the Wizengamot session, Harry couldn't sleep. He lay in Sirius's old bedroom, which was now his bedroom, he supposed, though it still smelled faintly of dog and motorcycle oil, and stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what tomorrow would look like. Footsteps in the hallway. Light, careful, but not sneaking, more like someone who was being considerate about noise. A knock on the open door. Daphne Greengrass stood in the doorway in a dressing gown, holding 2 mugs of tea. She'd been staying in one of the guest rooms. Augusta had insisted on the propriety of a chaperone, which Augusta herself served, and Daphne had accepted the arrangement with the air of someone who found social conventions amusing but useful. "You should be asleep," she said. "Pot, kettle." She handed him a mug and sat in a chair by the window without asking permission. In the moonlight, with her hair down and the political armor stripped away, she looked younger. Closer to 17. More human. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "No. Are you?" "I've been ready for 3 years. My father has been fighting Dumbledore's financial manipulation since I was 14. I've watched him spend every evening poring over legal documents, trying to find the crack in the wall. I've watched my mother worry that the business would collapse, that we'd lose our home, that someone would come for us in the night because we dared to push back against the great Albus Dumbledore." She sipped her tea. "So yes. I'm ready. Why did you come to me?" "Really?" "Not the political answer, the real one." She was quiet for a moment. "Because you're the only person in the wizarding world with enough power, enough standing, and enough righteous fury to actually win this fight. My father tried, and they buried him in bureaucracy. Augusta tried, and they stonewalled her for years. You have 3 lordships, a goblin-certified audit, and the kind of public profile that makes it impossible for the Wizengamot to sweep this under the rug. You're the weapon I've been waiting for." She paused, then added with a faint smile, "And I don't mean that in the dehumanizing way Dumbledore did. I mean you're the right person at the right time with the right cause. And what do you get out of it? Justice for my family. A seat at the table when the new order is being built. And the satisfaction of watching Albus Dumbledore answer for what he's done to people who couldn't fight back." She met his eyes. "Is that honest enough for you?" "It is." "Good. Now drink your tea and try to sleep. You have to look like a lord tomorrow, not a teenager who pulled an all-nighter." She left, and Harry drank his tea, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, he fell into a sleep so deep the dreams didn't find him. The Wizengamot chamber was deep in the bowels of the Ministry of Magic, and it looked exactly the way political power always looks, old, ornate, and designed to make individuals feel small. Stone benches rose in tiers around a central floor, each bench assigned to a hereditary seat or an appointed position. The ceiling was enchanted to show a clear sky, though Harry noticed that the clouds gathering at the edges looked a bit too realistic to be coincidental, and the acoustics were designed so that a whisper from the central floor would reach every seat in the chamber. Harry stood in the antechamber, wearing formal robes in black and deep crimson, the Potter colors, chosen deliberately, with the Peverell cloak over his shoulders and the 3 lordship rings visible on his hands. The Peverell sword hung at his hip, which had caused a minor security incident at the ministry entrance until Harry pointed out that an ancient house lord was entitled by law to bear their house weapon in any government proceeding. The security wizard had looked it up, turned pale, and waved him through. Neville was beside him, wearing the long-bottom ring and formal robes in deep green and gold. He looked calm. He looked, Harry thought, like a lord. Daphne stood on Harry's other side, holding her father's proxy seal and the leather portfolio that had become something of a talisman over the past 2 days. Behind them stood Augusta, Hermione, and Ron, the latter 2 as witnesses rather than speakers. The Weasley parents were already inside, having arrived early. Kingsley was there too, in his capacity as the assigned DMLE investigator. "The session begins in 5 minutes, Daphne said, checking a pocket watch that was clearly an heirloom. "Are you ready?" "I was born ready," Harry said, and then caught himself. "That sounded better in my head." "It really didn't," Neville said. Harry grinned, brief, sharp, genuine, and pushed open the doors to the Wizengamot chamber. The chamber was full. Not just the seated members, the public gallery was packed, which shouldn't have been possible since the session had been called with barely 48 hours' notice. But the legal notice in the Daily Prophet had done its work. The words Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, combined with emergency session, had drawn every journalist, political operative, and curious witch and wizard in Britain. Harry walked to the central floor. He could feel the eyes on him, hundreds of them, some curious, some hostile, some afraid. The Wizengamot members sat in their tiered benches in their plum-colored robes, and among them, he picked out faces he recognized. Amelia Bones, upright and watchful. Lucius Malfoy, out of Azkaban, apparently, and looking thin and diminished but still present, still voting. Members he didn't know, old families and appointed officials, the machinery of magical government assembled and waiting. And there, in the Chief Warlock's elevated seat, Albus Dumbledore. He looked magnificent. There was no other word for it. He'd chosen robes of deep blue embroidered with silver stars, and his beard was immaculate, and his half-moon spectacles caught the enchanted light, and he projected calm, wisdom, grandfatherly authority, the full Dumbledore, deployed with the skill of a man who'd been performing this role for decades. Their eyes met. Harry felt nothing, no legitimacy, no twinkling warmth, no grandfatherly manipulation. Just the cool assessment of a chess player evaluating an opponent's opening move. Harry didn't look away. The clerk of sessions, a pale, thin vampire named Sanguinus who had been processing Wizengamot paperwork since the 17th century, called the chamber to order with a voice like dry paper. This emergency session has been convened by petition of 5 hereditary seat holders, Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Lord Longbottom, and Proxy Greengrass acting for Lord Greengrass, with additional endorsements from the seats of Bones and Ogden. The petition cites matters of criminal financial irregularity and violations of the sacred trust of guardianship. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell has requested the floor. Chief Warlock, do you yield the chair, given the conflict of interest? Every eye turned to Dumbledore. The old man paused, a calculated pause, Harry knew, the kind that made it look like he was being thoughtful rather than strategic. I will yield the chair for this session, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. Though I wish to state for the record that I am confident the matters raised will be resolved through dialogue and mutual understanding. Noted, said Sanguinus, with the utter indifference of someone who had watched centuries of politicians' posture and found none of them particularly interesting. Madam Bones, as senior member present, will you chair? Amelia Bones stood, adjusted her monocle, and took the chair with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, you have the floor. Harry stepped to the central podium. He set down the Gringotts Audit, all 3 copies, and looked up at the assembled Wizengamot. Members of the Wizengamot, he said, and his voice was steady, clear, and carried the resonance of 3 house magics harmonizing behind it, a phenomenon that made several of the older members sit up straight. My name is Harry James Potter. Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Potter. Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black. Lord of the most ancient and noble house of Peverell. I stand before you today to present evidence of financial crimes committed against my houses by the current Chief Warlock, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The murmur that ran through the chamber was like a wave. In the gallery, quills were already scratching furiously. On the night of my 17th birthday, I attended Gringotts Bank for a standard inheritance verification. What I discovered instead was a systematic theft of my family's wealth spanning 15 years. The full audit is before you, certified by Gringotts, verified by blood magic and goblin accounting enchantments, admissible under Section 47 of the Wizengamot Evidence Charter. He opened the first ledger and laid the numbers bare. He didn't editorialize. He didn't perform outrage. He let the numbers speak. 973,000 galleons, the transfer codes, the destinations, the single name authorized on every withdrawal. He read out the coded payment designations. He read out the dates. He let the chamber hear that the theft had begun 2 days after his parents died, while their bodies were barely cold. Then he told them about the will. James and Lily Potter filed a last will and testament with the Department of Magical Records on September 2, 1981, 2 months before their death. This will named Sirius Black as my primary guardian and Alice Longbottom as my secondary guardian. It explicitly prohibited my placement with the Dursley family. On November 3, 1981, 2 days after Dumbledore filed himself as my magical guardian without the consent of any living Potter or Black family member, the Chief Warlock used his authority to seal this will. It has remained sealed for 16 years. During those 16 years, Sirius Black was imprisoned in Azkaban without a trial, a fact that might have been challenged had this will been public, since it demonstrated the Potters' absolute trust in Black as a guardian, directly contradicting the narrative that he had betrayed them. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Nobody was whispering. Nobody was shifting. Even Lucius Malfoy had gone still. I further present evidence of a marriage contract filed on my behalf without my knowledge or consent, binding me to Ginevra Weasley, a contract that has been annulled as fraudulent by Gringotts. He set down the annulment document. And I present evidence that the Weasley family was receiving monthly payments from my vault, disguised as distributions from a family charitable trust, coded under the designation, Subject Monitoring and Companionship Services. In the gallery, Molly Weasley made a sound like she'd been struck. Arthur put his arm around her. "I want to be clear," Harry said, his voice cutting through the rising tension, "that my investigation has found no evidence the Weasley family knew the true source or purpose of these payments. They appear to have been victims of the same deception that was perpetrated on me. This is not an accusation against them. This is an accusation against the man who used us both." He looked at Dumbledore. "Chief Warlock Dumbledore. I am formally charging you with line theft under the Goblin Wizarding Financial Accords of 1547, violation of the Sacred Trust of Guardianship under Section 12 of the Wizarding Family Code, fraud, conspiracy to pervert the course of magical justice, and illegal sealing of a legally filed last will and testament. I call upon this body to hear the evidence, render judgment, and impose the penalties prescribed by law." He stepped back from the podium. And Dumbledore stood. The old man walked to the central floor with the unhurried grace of someone who had been commanding rooms since before most of the people in it were born. He didn't look rattled. He didn't look guilty. He looked like a man about to explain something complicated to people who weren't quite clever enough to understand it, and Harry felt a surge of fury so hot it nearly escaped his control, because that expression, that condescension, was the entire problem distilled into a single face. "Members of the Wizengamot," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm, resonant, pitched perfectly to convey sorrow and sincerity. "What Lord Potter has presented to you is factually accurate. I will not insult this body or Lord Potter by denying the financial transactions he has described." Another wave of murmur, louder this time. "What I will do is provide context that Lord Potter, in his understandable youth and anger, has omitted." Dumbledore paused, and his blue eyes swept the chamber with the gravity of a man about to share a burden. "In November of 1981, I was faced with an impossible situation. Voldemort," the flinch rippled through the room, and Dumbledore noted it and used it, "had been temporarily defeated, but his followers remained active, dangerous, and specifically targeting the infant Harry Potter. Sirius Black was, at that time, under suspicion of betraying the Potters. The other named guardian, Alice Longbottom, was within days of being tortured into permanent incapacity. He let that sink in. I took emergency action. I placed Harry with his maternal relatives because the blood ward protection created by Lily's sacrifice was the only defense strong enough to guarantee his survival. I assumed guardianship because there was no one else. And yes, I redirected funds from the Potter estate to finance the protection of the wizarding world, including the very protections that kept Harry alive." "You redirected funds to your personal vault," Harry said from his seat. 80,000 galleons. "For expenses." Maintaining safe houses, intelligence networks, and protective enchantments is not free, Lord Potter. Every galleon I took was spent in the service of your survival and the broader fight against darkness. And the sealed will? Dumbledore hesitated. It was the first crack, tiny, almost invisible, but Harry saw it and knew every Auror-trained eye in the room saw it too. I sealed the will to protect Sirius Black, Dumbledore said. Had the will become public during that chaotic period, it would have complicated the Auror investigation and potentially endangered Black further. I intended to unseal it once the situation stabilized. It's been 16 years. I acknowledge that the sealing persisted longer than intended. That was an oversight, a serious one, and one for which I am deeply sorry. An oversight that kept an innocent man in prison for 12 years. Dumbledore's face tightened. For a moment, just a moment, Harry saw something behind the mask. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. The look of a man who had made so many necessary sacrifices that he could no longer tell the difference between necessity and habit. I have made mistakes, Dumbledore said. I freely admit that. But everything, was done in service of the greater, don't say it. Harry's voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber like a blade. Don't you dare stand in this room and say those words. The greater good. Your greater good. Whose good, Professor? Not mine. Not my parents. Not Sirius's. Not the Longbottoms. Not the Weasleys. Whose good, exactly, has been served by your decades of manipulation? Dumbledore looked at him, and for the first time, there was no twinkle, no warmth, no performance. Just two pairs of eyes meeting across a chamber full of people who were watching the most powerful wizard in Britain being challenged by the young man he'd shaped into a weapon. The world's, Dumbledore said quietly. The whole world's. Neville stood. The chamber shifted to look at him. Members of the Wizengamot, I am Lord Longbottom. I present a secondary audit, also certified by Gringotts, showing 40,000 galleons misappropriated from the Longbottom estate using the same methods described by Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. He set his own audit on the podium. My parents are in the Janus Thicky ward at St. Mungo's. They have been there for 16 years. While they lay incapacitated and unable to advocate for themselves, the chief warlock helped himself to their family's money. He looked at Dumbledore. You stole from people who couldn't fight back. That's not the greater good. That's just theft. Augusta Longbottom stood in the gallery, and her voice rang out like a bell struck in anger. And he sealed my daughter-in-law's medical records. Alice Longbottom's treatment files, sealed by order of the chief warlock, preventing our family from seeking alternative healing methods. For 16 years I've been denied access to information that could have helped my son and his wife, and I want to know why. The chamber erupted. Bones hammered her gavel for order, but it took nearly 2 minutes for the noise to subside. In those 2 minutes, Harry watched Dumbledore's face and saw what he'd been looking for, not defeat, because Dumbledore was too intelligent and too stubborn for that, but the recognition that the ground had shifted beneath him in a way he could not reverse with words alone. The session continued for 3 more hours. Daphne presented the greengrass evidence, the financial manipulation, the regulatory capture, the pattern of institutional corruption that connected the Potter theft to a broader system of control. Kingsley testified about the DMLE investigation's preliminary findings, which corroborated the Gringotts audit. Ragnok himself appeared via a magical projection from Gringotts. Goblins did not enter the ministry, as a rule, but they could project, and Ragnok's testimony was delivered with the cold precision of a nation that took financial crimes very personally indeed. When it was done, Amelia Bones called for a preliminary vote on 3 motions: suspension of Dumbledore's position as chief warlock pending investigation, formal appointment of a Wizengamot investigative committee, and the issuance of a freeze on all accounts connected to Dumbledore's discretionary authority. The vote was not close. Dumbledore was suspended by a margin of 37 to 12, with 3 abstentions. The investigative committee was approved unanimously. The account freeze passed by an even wider margin. As the votes were counted, Harry watched Dumbledore's face. The old man sat in his bench, not the chief warlock's chair anymore, just a bench among benches, and he looked, not defeated. Thoughtful. Calculating. Already planning his next move. Because men like Dumbledore didn't stop when they lost a battle. They regrouped. They adapted. They found new angles. And Harry knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't over. The session ended. People filed out in clusters, whispering, arguing, already reshaping the political landscape in their heads. Reporters swarmed toward Harry and were held back by a shield charm Daphne cast without looking up from her notes. Molly Weasley pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face, and wrapped Harry in a hug so tight he felt his ribs creak. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Harry, I swear on my magic, I didn't know." "I believe you," he said, and hugged her back. Arthur shook his hand with both of his, looking 10 years older than he had the last time Harry saw him. "Whatever you need from our family," Arthur said. "Whatever it takes to make this right." In the emptying chamber, Dumbledore gathered his things with the calm precision of a man who had lost a position but not his composure. He caught Harry's eye one final time as he passed through the doors. No words. Just a look. The kind of look chess players exchange when the game enters its final phase and both sides know the board is about to change completely. Outside the ministry, in the late afternoon sun, Harry stood with his allies and breathed real air and felt the weight of what they'd done settle onto his shoulders. Not crushing. Grounding. The weight of houses, his responsibilities, his war. Neville stood beside him, solid as stone. Daphne was already making notes for the next phase. Augusta was speaking with Amelia Bones in low, urgent tones. Hermione was cross-referencing something. Ron was watching the ministry entrance with the eyes of someone standing guard. That was the easy part, wasn't it? Neville said quietly. Yeah, Harry said. That was the easy part. Because Dumbledore was suspended, not destroyed. Because Voldemort was still out there. Because the Horcruxes still needed to be found and eliminated. Because the war was coming regardless of politics, and Harry was now fighting on two fronts with the same people he'd always had, a handful of friends, a pile of courage, and the stubborn refusal to let bastards win. But this time, he wasn't fighting blind. This time, he wasn't fighting poor. This time, he wasn't fighting as someone's pawn. He was Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, and the game wasn't chess anymore. It was war. Chapter 3, The Greater Good Burns. The Daily Prophet hit doorsteps across Wizarding Britain at 6 in the morning, and by 7, the world Harry Potter had known was unrecognizable. The headline screamed in letters 3 inches tall, Dumbledore suspended, Lord Potter reveals million galleon theft. Below it, a photograph of Harry at the Wizengamot podium, 3 lordship rings catching the light, the Peverell cloak dark on his shoulders. He looked, in the photograph, like someone who had stopped asking permission. The moving image replayed the moment he'd said, "Who's good, exactly?" The camera had caught the exact instant Dumbledore flinched, and whoever chose that shot knew exactly what they were doing. Harry read the paper standing in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place with a cup of tea going cold in his hand. The reporting was actually fair, more balanced than he'd expected from the Prophet, and he suspected Daphne's strategic decision to file the public disclosure notice rather than feeding the story directly to a reporter had paid off. The paper couldn't spin what was already on the official record. The secondary stories were where it got interesting. A sidebar detailed the Longbottom audit, with a quote from Augusta that could have stripped paint. An opinion piece questioned the ministry's failure to oversee the chief warlock's financial authority. And buried on page 6, a short article noted that 17 separate families had contacted Gringotts overnight requesting emergency audits of their own hereditary accounts. "It's spreading," Daphne said from the doorway. She was already dressed for the day, charcoal robes, hair pulled back, the Greengrass proxy ring on her finger. She'd been up before Harry, which he suspected was a deliberate power move, and she was holding her own copy of the Prophet with several sections circled in red ink. 17 families, Harry said. 23 by now, according to my father's morning report from Gringotts. And those are just the ones who acted overnight. By midday, it'll be 50. She sat across from him and spread her circled sections on the table. This is the cascade I was hoping for. Dumbledore's financial network didn't just touch your vault and the Longbottoms. It touched every family he ever needed something from, donations laundered through shell funds, grants redirected from their stated purposes, investments manipulated through regulatory capture. The more families that audit, the more evidence surfaces. The more evidence surfaces, the harder it becomes for anyone to frame this as a personal vendetta between you and Dumbledore. You planned for this. My father planned for this. 3 years of preparation, Lord Potter. We just needed someone to kick the door open. She looked at him over the top of the paper. You kicked admirably. Harry might have responded to that, but two things happened in rapid succession. First, the fireplace flared green and Kingsley Shacklebolt's head appeared in the flames, his expression urgent. Second, every ward on Grimmauld Place screamed simultaneously, a sound Harry felt in his bones more than his ears, and the Peverell ring on his finger blazed so hot it nearly burned. Harry, Kingsley said. Dumbledore's gone. What do you mean, gone? I mean he's not at Hogwarts. He left the castle sometime in the night. The wards registered his departure at approximately 3 a.m. He took the Elder Wand and several items from his office. McGonagall found his phoenix missing as well. The DMLE has issued a locate order, but, the wards screamed again. Harry felt at this time, something pressing against the protections of the house, testing them, probing with a delicacy and power that could only belong to one person. He's here, Harry said. Kingsley's eyes widened. Do not engage alone. I'm coming through, no. Harry was already moving. The Peverell sword was in his hand, he didn't remember drawing it, it was just there, the way a wand finds the hand that needs it. He's not trying to break in. He's knocking. Harry walked to the front door of Grimmauld Place, and through the Black Lord's connection to the wards, he could feel what was on the other side. One person. Immensely powerful. No hostile intent, not exactly, but a coiled readiness, like a spring under tension. He opened the door. Dumbledore stood on the step in traveling robes of plain grey, stripped of the colorful grandeur he usually wore like armor. He looked like what he was, an old man, a powerful wizard, someone who had not slept. Fawkes sat on his shoulder, the phoenix's feathers dimmed to a muted gold, as if the bird was uncertain about the whole proceeding. I am not here to fight, Dumbledore said. Then why are you here? Because we need to talk. Not as adversaries. Not as guardian and ward. As two people who both want Voldemort dead and who are running out of time to accomplish it. His eyes moved past Harry to the hallway beyond. May I come in? Every instinct Harry had was screaming different things. Trust him. Don't trust him. Hear him out. Slam the door. The Peverell cloak whispered at the edges of his mind, not words, but impressions, the accumulated wisdom of a family that had spent centuries navigating the space between caution and courage. You can come in, Harry said. But you come in on my terms. No wand in your hand. No legilimency. No manipulation. You talk straight or you don't talk at all. Dumbledore inclined his head, drew the Elder Wand from his sleeve, and held it out to Harry, hilt first. Harry stared at it. The Elder Wand. The Death Stick. The most powerful wand in the world, offered to him on a dark London doorstep at 7:30 in the morning. I don't want your wand, Harry said. I want your honesty. Keep the wand and keep your hands where I can see them. Something flickered across Dumbledore's face, surprise, maybe. He'd expected Harry to take the wand. He'd prepared for that move, planned around it, and Harry had refused to play. Good. They sat in the kitchen. Daphne was still there. She'd moved to the corner, quiet and watchful, her hand resting on her wand in a way that looked casual and wasn't. Harry didn't ask her to leave. He wanted a witness, and he wanted Dumbledore to know there was a witness. "Talk," Harry said. Dumbledore folded his hands on the table. Without his robes of office, without the twinkle, without the elaborate persona, he looked strangely ordinary. Just a very old, very tired man sitting at a kitchen table. "Everything you said in the Wizengamot was true," he began. "Every number, every document, every accusation. I took your money. I sealed your parents' will. I placed you with the Dursleys against their wishes. I filed the marriage contract. I did all of it." Harry said nothing. Waited. "I told the Wizengamot it was for the greater good, and I will not retract that, because I believe it. I have spent my entire life fighting dark wizards, Harry, not just Voldemort, but Grindelwald before him, and others whose names history has forgotten because I stopped them before they could write their legacies in blood. Every victory cost something. Money, relationships, my own moral certainty. And every time, I told myself the cost was worth it, because the alternative was worse. The alternative to stealing from an orphan. The alternative to losing the war." Dumbledore's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, not quite pleading, but close. "When your parents died, I had a network of protections and intelligence operations that were the only thing standing between Voldemort's remaining followers and the collapse of wizarding society. Those operations needed funding. The ministry was compromised, Malfoy, Nott, Crabbe, half the old families had people inside the government, and any funding that went through official channels was visible to them. I needed untraceable gold, and I needed it immediately, and the Potter Vault was the largest unmonitored account I had access to. So you helped yourself. I did what I thought was necessary. I know you don't believe that distinction matters, and perhaps you're right. But I am trying, for once, to be fully honest with you, and the honest truth is that I did not steal your money for personal gain or petty reasons. I stole it because I was fighting a war and I was afraid of losing." The kitchen was silent. Harry could hear the tick of the clock on the wall, the faint murmur of the house's magic as it breathed around them, the scratch of Daphne's quill. She was taking notes, because of course she was. "That doesn't excuse it," Harry said. "No. It doesn't. And the will? You sealed it because you were afraid Sirius would get custody and take me somewhere you couldn't control." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. "Yes. And the marriage contract? I needed the Weasley family's loyalty secured long-term. Molly and Arthur are good people, I knew they would care for you genuinely. But I also needed a permanent tie, something that would keep them invested in your welfare and your destiny even if doubts arose. You arranged a marriage for a 14-year-old boy. To secure a political alliance. I arranged a future that would give you a loving family, a stable home, and a wife who cared about you. I chose Ginevra because she was strong, brave, and genuinely fond of you. I did not choose cruelly. You didn't choose at all." Harry's voice cracked the calm like a hammer on glass. "It wasn't your choice to make. None of it, not the money, not the guardianship, not the will, not the marriage, none of it was yours. You took my entire life and rebuilt it to your specifications and called it love and called it necessity and called it the greater good, and it was theft. Not just of Galleons. Of everything. My childhood. My choices. My parents' wishes. Sirius's freedom. You stole all of it and you sat in your tower and ate your lemon drops and told yourself you were the hero of the story." The windows rattled. The tea mug slid across the table. Harry's magic was pressing outward, not destructively but expansively, filling the room with a pressure that made Daphne grip the edge of her chair and made Dumbledore lean back, not in fear but in recognition. "You're right," Dumbledore said quietly. "I told myself I was the hero. It was easier than admitting I had become something else. The pressure eased. Not because Harry calmed down, but because he chose to pull it back, like reeling in a fishing line. Control. That was what the Peverell magic had given him, not just power, but control, the ability to feel everything and choose how to express it. You said we're running out of time, Harry said. Explain. Dumbledore looked at him, and for the first time since Harry had known him, there was no barrier between them. No twinkle, no performance, no chess master's calculation. Just an old man who was very frightened. I'm dying, Dumbledore said. He pulled back the sleeve of his left robe. His hand, the one Harry had seen blackened and dead-looking at the start of 6th year, was worse. The curse had spread past his wrist, crawling up his forearm in tendrils of necrotic darkness. The skin was cracked and gray, and Harry could feel the magic in it, a death curse, old and virulent, gnawing its way toward Dumbledore's heart. The ring, Harry said. Marvolo Gaunt's ring. The Horcrux. I was a fool. Dumbledore's voice was flat with self-recrimination. I saw the resurrection stone and I wanted it. Not for strategy. Not for the war. I wanted to see my sister again. Ariana. She died when I was young, and it was, at least partly, my fault. I put on the ring without thinking, and the curse took hold. Severus has contained it, but containment is not a cure. I have, at best, months. Snape knows. Severus knows. He has been, reluctantly, bitterly, and with considerable commentary about my intelligence, keeping me alive since the beginning of the summer. Harry processed this. Filed it. Moved on. You said we're running out of time. You mean the Horcruxes? Voldemort has made 6, Dumbledore said. The diary, which you destroyed in your 2nd year. The ring, which I destroyed at the cost of my hand. The locket of Slytherin, which I believe is hidden in a cave. The cup of Hufflepuff, which I believe is in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. The diadem of Ravenclaw, which I believe is somewhere in Hogwarts. And, the piece in my scar, Harry said. Which you plan to destroy by letting Voldemort kill me. The silence was deafening. Yes, Dumbledore whispered. There are other ways. I didn't know, you didn't look. Harry stood. He walked to the counter, poured himself fresh tea with steady hands, and turned back to face the old man. The Peverell Library contains 17 documented methods for Horcrux extraction that don't require the death of the host. 17. The Peverells invented the killing curse, they understood soul magic better than anyone in history. One method involves a ritual that separates the parasitic fragment using the host's own magic as a filter. Another uses a specific runic array to draw the fragment out and contain it. The simplest method, the one a competent researcher would have found if they'd bothered to look beyond the obvious, involves nothing more than basilisk venom applied directly to the connection point while the host is under the protection of a phoenix's song. Dumbledore stared at him. Basilisk venom, Harry repeated. Phoenix song. I had both of those in the Chamber of Secrets when I was 12. If you had told me about the Horcrux then, if you had told me anything, ever, we could have dealt with it 4 years ago. The old man's face crumbled. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow, terrible way that a cliff face erodes, piece by piece, the weight of accumulated failure finally exceeding the structure's ability to hold itself together. I was afraid, Dumbledore said. Not of the method. Of telling you the truth. You were a child, Harry. A child who had already suffered more than any child should. How could I tell you there was a piece of Voldemort's soul in your head? How could I put that burden on a 12-year-old boy? By trusting me. The way my parents trusted Sirius. The way you never trusted anyone. Dumbledore said nothing. There was nothing to say. Harry sat back down. He looked at the old man across the table, the most powerful wizard in the world, dying, stripped of his offices, facing criminal charges, and still, despite everything, the person who knew more about Voldemort's Horcruxes than anyone alive. Harry made a decision. It wasn't a kind decision or a forgiving one. It was a strategic one. "Here's what's going to happen," Harry said. "You're going to give me everything you know about the remaining Horcruxes, locations, protections, defenses, everything. You're going to do it now, completely, without holding anything back for leverage or dramatic timing. In exchange, I will not push for Azkaban. I'll argue for house arrest, stripped titles, and financial restitution. You'll spend whatever time you have left helping to clean up the mess you've made, and when the curse takes you, you'll go knowing you finally did the right thing. Not the greater good. The right thing. And if I refuse? Then I destroy the Horcruxes without your help, which I can do, because the Peverell Library gives me everything I need, and you spend your last months in a cell in Azkaban while the war rages on without you. Your choice." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The clock ticked. Fawkes trilled softly on the old man's shoulder, and the phoenix's song was sad and sweet and carried the weight of all the choices that couldn't be unmade. "The locket is in a sea cave on the coast of Cornwall," Dumbledore said. "The entrance requires a blood sacrifice, a small cut. Inside, there is a lake of infery surrounding an island with a stone basin. The basin contains a potion that must be drunk to reach the locket. The potion causes extreme suffering, hallucinations, pain, despair. I had planned to drink it myself. Then what? Then the infery attack when you touch the water. Fire drives them back, but the numbers are considerable." Harry nodded. "The cup. Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, deep in Gringotts. The vault is protected by a Gemino curse, everything you touch multiplies and burns. There's also a dragon guarding the lower levels. I've dealt with dragons before. The diadem? I believe it's in the room of requirement at Hogwarts, hidden among the accumulated detritus of centuries of students. The room presents differently depending on need, you must ask it for a place to hide things. And the snake. Nagini. She's one too, isn't she?" Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "You know about Nagini. The Peverell Library includes a treatise on living Horcruxes. A magical snake constantly at Voldemort's side, kept closer than any servant, protected by enchantments that shouldn't be necessary for a simple familiar. It's obvious once you know what to look for." "Yes. Nagini is the sixth Horcrux, created during the resurrection ritual in your 4th year. She will be the hardest to destroy because Voldemort keeps her with him at all times." Harry was quiet, tallying in his head. "The diary, destroyed. The ring, destroyed. That left the locket, the cup, the diadem, Nagini, and the fragment in his scar. 5 Horcruxes. 5 obstacles between the world and Voldemort's mortality. One more thing," Harry said. "The prophecy." Dumbledore stiffened slightly. "The full prophecy," Harry pressed. "Not the version you showed me in the pensive. The whole thing." A beat of silence. Then Dumbledore spoke, and his voice carried the cadence of something recited from memory too many times. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies." "That's the version I've heard," Harry said. "Is there more?" The pause was infinitesimal. Most people would have missed it. Harry didn't. "There is a secondary stanza," Dumbledore said, and something in his voice told Harry the old man had been sitting on this for a very long time. "Recorded by a different witness, a goblin, actually, who was present in the pub that night and whose testimony was kept in the Gringotts archives. Sybil Trelawney's prophecy was heard by multiple parties, and the goblin version includes lines that Severus, who only heard the first part before being ejected, never reported to Voldemort. Say it. When three become one and the lost line rises, the marked one shall wield what death itself prizes. Not as master but as equal he shall stand, and unmake the dark work by his own hand. The theft of the old shall break the old's chain, and the truth in the blood shall make whole what was slain. The words settled into the kitchen like stones dropped into still water. When three become one. 3 lordships. 3 houses. The Peverell Ring's inscription, for the last lord, when three become one. The theft of the old shall break the old's chain. Dumbledore's theft. The audit. The chain of control Harry had just shattered. The truth in the blood shall make whole what was slain. The blood verification at Gringotts. The truth about who Harry was and what he was owed. The prophecy predicted this, Harry said slowly. All of it. Not just my fight with Voldemort, but my break with you. It was supposed to happen. It was the mechanism. I had to discover the theft, claim the lordships, and break free of your control, because that was the path to the power Voldemort doesn't know about. Dumbledore's eyes were bright. Not with the old twinkle, with something raw. I knew the secondary prophecy existed. I obtained the goblin's testimony 30 years ago. And I spent 30 years trying to find a way to fulfill the prophecy without losing control of the situation. I believed, that I could manage the transition. Guide you toward the 3 lordships gradually, reveal the truth in stages, maintain the structure while you grew into the power. He shook his head. I was wrong. The prophecy didn't want a managed transition. It wanted exactly what happened, a breaking. A rupture. You had to discover the betrayal yourself, feel the fury yourself, claim the power yourself. Because the power isn't in the lordships or the vaults or the Peverell artifacts. It's in the choice. Your choice, freely made, with full knowledge of what was done to you, to fight anyway. Harry thought about that. Turned it over. That doesn't excuse what you did, he said. No. But it does explain why I couldn't stop myself from doing it. I was part of the prophecy too, the old man whose theft broke his own chain. I was the obstacle you had to overcome. And I was too proud, too afraid, and too invested in my own importance to see that the best thing I could have done was step aside. The kitchen was very quiet. Fawkes sang, 3 notes, ascending, pure as water, and something in the air changed. Not magically. Emotionally. The tension between them didn't dissolve, but it shifted, rearranging itself into something that wasn't forgiveness but might, given enough time and enough honesty, become understanding. Give me the cave location, Harry said. Exact coordinates. And everything you know about the Lestrange vault protections. I'm going after the Horcruxes, and I'm going now, before Voldemort realizes what's happening. Dumbledore provided every detail he had, maps, notes, decades of research compiled in small, precise handwriting. Harry listened, asked sharp questions, and committed everything to memory with a clarity that surprised even him. The Peverell blood magic wasn't just giving him new knowledge, it was enhancing his ability to process and retain information, as if his mind had been running at half capacity his entire life and someone had finally removed the limiter. When Dumbledore finished, Harry stood and looked down at the old man sitting at his kitchen table. Go to Hogwarts, Harry said. Stay there. Let McGonagall ward you, the castle's protections can slow the curse. When the Wizengamot reconvenes, you'll appear voluntarily and submit to their judgment. No tricks. No escapes. No last-minute revelations designed to make yourself look sympathetic. And if Voldemort attacks before then you defend the castle. That's what a real headmaster would do. Harry paused at the door. And Dumbledore, if I find out you've held anything else back, if there's one more secret, one more manipulation, one more piece of my life you've tried to control, the deal is off. Azkaban. No leniency. No legacy. Dumbledore rose from the table. He looked diminished, not physically, but in some essential way, as if the removal of his secrets had been a kind of deflation. Fawkes chirped once, then flamed away, taking the old man with him in a burst of golden fire. Harry stood in the empty kitchen and breathed. That was remarkable, Daphne said from her corner. That was necessary. Both things can be true. She rose and approached the table where Dumbledore's notes were spread out. Her eyes moved across them with the quick precision of someone accustomed to processing complex information. You're going after the Horcruxes immediately. Can't wait. Dumbledore's suspension is in the Prophet. Voldemort reads the Prophet, or has people who read it for him. He's going to realize that the power structure has shifted, that Dumbledore is compromised, and that his best play is to move now while everything is in chaos. Then you need a team. I need a small team. Fast, capable, trusted. You have one. Neville arrived within the hour, already geared up in dragon-hide boots and a combat robe his grandmother had given him that was enchanted with more protective charms than Harry could count. He carried the sword of Gryffindor, which had apparently appeared in his room that morning, materializing on his pillow like a particularly aggressive gift. The Sorting Hat tried to put me in Gryffindor for a reason, Neville said, when Harry raised an eyebrow at the sword. Reckon the castle agrees. Ron came through the flue 10 minutes later, armed with his wand and a face that said he'd made his peace with whatever was coming. Mum tried to stop me. Dad told her to let me go. She's at the kitchen table praying to every saint she knows. Hermione. She's at the ministry, working with Bones on the legal side. She said to tell you she'll have every statute and precedent ready for whatever comes after, and also that you should try not to die because she hasn't finished organizing the evidence files. Harry laughed, a real laugh, startled out of him, and it felt good. It felt like being human. They planned over the kitchen table with military efficiency. The lock at first, it was the most remote, the least likely to alert Voldemort, and Dumbledore's intelligence on the cave protections was detailed enough to plan around. Then the cup and Gringotts, which would require goblin cooperation. Then the diadem at Hogwarts. Nagini would come last, because Nagini meant confronting Voldemort himself. And the fragment in Harry's scar, that, Harry would deal with himself, using the Peverell extraction ritual, before the final confrontation. He'd need a phoenix's song and basilisk venom, and he knew exactly where to find both. One thing, Daphne said. She'd been listening to the tactical planning with the expression of someone who had opinions but was choosing her moment. While you're hunting Horcruxes, who's managing the political situation? Dumbledore is suspended, not silenced. He has allies on the Wizengamot who are already working to frame the suspension as an overreach. The investigative committee needs to be stacked with neutrals, not Dumbledore loyalists. And Voldemort's people, Malfoy, not, the rest, they're going to try to exploit the chaos. You are, Harry said. I'm what? Managing the political situation. You, Augusta, Hermione when she's available. You have my proxy for all 3 seats. Use them. Daphne stared at him. It was the first time he'd seen her genuinely thrown. You're giving me proxy authority over 3 Wizengamot seats. Just like that. You've spent 3 years preparing for this fight. Your father built the evidence, you built the strategy, and you showed up at my door with exactly the ammunition I needed. I trust your judgment, I trust your motives, and I don't have time to micromanage politics while I'm crawling through caves and breaking into bank vaults. She recovered fast. The surprise folded back into composure, but something warm flickered through, brief, quickly controlled, but real. I won't let you down. I know. They left Grimmauld Place at noon, Harry, Neville, and Ron, traveling light and moving fast. Daphne watched them go from the doorstep, the 3 Wizengamot proxy seals heavy in her pocket and a war to fight that didn't require a single spell. The cave was exactly as bad as Dumbledore had described. They apparat to the Cornwall coast, a stretch of black cliff above churning grey sea, and climbed down to the cave entrance using handholds that Harry suspected had been carved by Voldemort himself as a teenager, because who else would make the approach to their secret lair deliberately terrifying? The blood payment at the entrance was simple. Harry cut his palm and pressed it to the rock, and the stone slid open to reveal a cavern that smelled of salt and old magic and something else, something dead and waiting. The lake of Inferi stretched before them in the darkness, black water reflecting no light, and the island in the center was barely visible, a pale stone shelf holding a basin that glowed with sickly green luminescence. Inferi, Ron said, peering at the water. Loads of them. Dumbledore said fire drives them back. I can do fire, Neville said, and there was something in his voice that made Harry look at him. Neville's wand was already out, and the tip glowed with a heat that had nothing to do with a standard warming charm. The sword of Gryffindor gleamed on his hip. His face was set and calm and absolutely lethal. Right, Harry said. Here's the plan. I cross to the island, deal with the potion in the basin, and get the locket. You two stay here and make sure nothing that crawls out of that lake gets between me and the exit. You're drinking the potion alone. Ron said. I'm not drinking it at all. Harry drew the Peverell sword. Dumbledore assumed the potion had to be drunk because the basin is enchanted to repel vanishing spells, summoning charms, and physical removal. But the basin itself is just stone. Stone breaks. He crossed the lake in the small boat that responded to his magic, barely large enough for one, which is why he went alone, and stood on the island looking down into the basin of glowing green liquid. The potion roiled and shifted, and through it, he could see the glint of a gold locket at the bottom. The Peverell sword hummed in his hand. The magic in the blade was older than the cave, older than Voldemort, older than the enchantments on the basin. It had been forged by people who understood death magic at its most fundamental level, and Voldemort's protections, clever as they were, had been designed to counter wizard spells, not Peverell steel. Harry raised the sword and brought it down on the basin. The stone shattered. The potion exploded outward in a wave of green light that hit Harry's shield charm and spattered harmlessly across the island. The locket bounced free, spinning across the wet stone, and Harry caught it in his gloved hand. The moment the locket left the basin, the lake erupted. Inferi, hundreds of them, surging up from the black water in a wave of grey, waterlogged flesh and empty eyes. They came from every direction, climbing over each other, reaching with pale fingers, making no sound at all, which was somehow worse than screaming. From the shore, Neville's fire was already raging. Not a simple incendio, a wall of flame that stretched from the cave floor to the ceiling, blazing white-hot, turning the cavern into an oven. The Inferi nearest the shore fell back, shrieking silently, their dead flesh charring and crumbling. Ron was beside Neville, adding his own fire, his wand arm steady and his jaw clenched tight. Harry crossed back in the boat through a gauntlet of reaching hands. An Inferius grabbed the prow and he slashed it away with the Peverell sword, the blade cut through dead flesh like it was cutting through a memory, and the creature dissolved into ash where the steel touched it. He hit the shore running, the locket clenched in his fist, and the three of them backed toward the exit while Neville's fire held the Inferi at bay, a sea of flame against a sea of dead, and the fire was winning. They burst out of the cave into daylight and stood on the cliff face, breathing hard, covered in salt spray and the ash of destroyed Inferi. One down, Harry said, holding up the locket. 3 to go, Neville said, extinguishing his wand with a flick. He wasn't even winded. They destroyed the locket right there on the cliff. Harry opened it using Parseltongue, a hissing command that felt wrong in his mouth but worked perfectly, and the soul fragment inside screamed and writhed and tried to project images of their worst fears. Harry saw Dumbledore's face, kind and lying. Ron saw his family turning away from him. Neville saw his parents, broken and empty-eyed. Neville drove the sword of Gryffindor through the locket while it was still screaming. The soul fragment exploded in a burst of black smoke that smelled like burning hair, and then it was gone, and the locket was just a locket, broken, empty, dead. Gringotts was next. They walked into the bank at 3 in the afternoon, and Ragnok was waiting for them. The director of Gringotts London listened to Harry's request with an expression that started at professional neutrality and ended somewhere in the vicinity of barely contained glee. "You want to break into the Lestrange vault," Ragnok said. "I want authorized entry to the Lestrange vault to destroy a piece of Voldemort's soul that's hidden inside. And what do you offer Gringotts in return for this unprecedented access?" Harry had thought about this. The Lestrange family is in violation of the Gringotts storage accords. They've hidden a cursed object designed to harm bank employees in their vault without disclosure. Under Section 9 of the Accords, that forfeits their vault protections and entitles Gringotts to seize the vault's contents as compensation. Ragnok's smile was a terrible, beautiful thing. "You've been reading our treaties, Lord Potter. I've had good advisors." "Indeed." Ragnok stood and straightened his armor. "Allow me to escort you personally. I've been waiting for an excuse to open the Lestrange vault for years." The journey down to the vault was wild, the fastest cart ride Harry had ever experienced, past waterfalls and dragon-guarded caverns, Ragnok cackling with what could only be described as professional joy. The dragon guarding the lower levels took one look at the goblin director, Harry's Peverell cloak, and Neville's Gryffindor sword, and shuffled aside without a fight. The Lestrange vault opened at Ragnok's command, director's override, the goblin equivalent of a master key, used only in cases of accord violations. Inside, the Gemino curse was active, everything they touched began multiplying and heating, but Harry didn't need to touch anything. "Accio Hufflepuff's cup," he said, and put every ounce of his Triple House magic behind it. The cup ripped free of its shelf, burning through the multiplying copies, and flew into his hand. It was hot, and the soul fragment inside shrieked and fought, and Harry felt Voldemort's rage like a distant thunderstorm. The Dark Lord knew, now, that his defenses were being breached. Neville stepped forward and drove the sword of Gryffindor through Hufflepuff's cup with a single, clean thrust. The soul fragment died screaming, and the cup cracked in half, and Ragnok looked at the broken artifact with professional satisfaction and said, "Excellent. I'll add this to the damage claim." They left Gringotts at a run. 2 Horcruxes destroyed in a single day, and Harry could feel the clock ticking. Voldemort knew, Voldemort was reacting, and whatever was coming next was coming fast. Hogwarts was in lockdown when they arrived. McGonagall had activated the castle's ancient wards, the deep protections that predated Dumbledore's tenure, protections that drew on the magic of the building itself and the 1,000 years of witches and wizards who had called it home. "He's coming," McGonagall said, meeting them at the gates. Her face was stone. "Death Eaters have been spotted massing near Hogsmeade. The order is here, Lupin, Tonks, the Weasleys, everyone we could gather on short notice." "Dumbledore?" "In his office. The curse has weakened him considerably since this morning. He can barely stand, but he insists on being present." Harry nodded and headed for the room of requirement. The room opened for him on the first try, the room of hidden things, an endless labyrinth of abandoned objects piled to the ceiling. Finding the diadem should have been impossible, a needle in a haystack the size of a cathedral. But Harry was Lord Peverell, and the Peverells had made the diadem's original enchantments. Rowena Ravenclaw had married into the Peverell line 4 centuries ago, and the family magic recognized its cousin. The diadem called to him. A tug behind his sternum, a direction his feet followed without conscious thought, winding through towering piles of forgotten furniture and broken broomsticks and moldering textbooks until he stood before a dusty stone bust wearing a tarnished silver tiara. He lifted it off with the tip of the Peverell sword, and the soul fragment inside hissed and spat and whispered terrible things. "You are nothing, you are a weapon, you are what old men made you," and Harry said, "I know what I am," and drove the sword through the diadem, and the fragment died. 3 down. 2 to go. The Scar and the Snake. Harry went to the Chamber of Secrets. He went alone. The chamber opened for his Parseltongue as it always had, and he descended into the great stone cavern with its serpentine pillars and its vast, vaulted ceiling and the skeleton of the basilisk he'd killed at 12 still lying where it had fallen, its bones picked clean by time but still massive, still terrifying, still saturated with venom. Harry knelt beside the skull, extracted venom from the still potent fong using a conjured vial, and then stood in the center of the chamber, the place where he'd almost died, the place where Riddle's memory had mocked him, and began the Peverell extraction ritual. It was simpler than he'd expected. A circle of runes drawn in basilisk venom. A drop of his own blood at the center. And the component he'd been uncertain about until Fawkes appeared in a burst of flame, perching on a stone serpent and beginning to sing. Phoenix song filled the chamber. It was the most beautiful sound Harry had ever heard, pure, transcendent, heartbreaking in its beauty. The song penetrated his scar like sunlight through fog, and the thing inside it, the dark, parasitic fragment of Tom Riddle's soul that had lived in Harry's head for 16 years, shrieked. Harry felt it being pulled out. Not painfully, not with the agony he'd always associated with Voldemort's presence, but with a sensation of suction, of separation, of something that had been clinging finally losing its grip. The basilisk venom in the rune circle activated, creating a barrier of destruction around the fragment as it was extracted, a killing jar, essentially, that dissolved the Horcrux the instant it left Harry's body. Black smoke poured from his scar. The smoke hit the venom barrier and ignited, a brief, brilliant flare of dark fire, and then it was gone. Harry stood in a chamber of secrets with blood dripping from his scar and the phoenix singing and a lightness in his head that he had never experienced in his entire life. The constant low-grade headache he'd had since he was 11, so constant he'd forgotten it was there, was gone. The whispers at the edges of his consciousness, Voldemort's emotions bleeding through, always bleeding through, were silent. He was alone in his own head for the first time. He was free. Fawkes trilled once more, a note of completion, and flamed away. Harry wiped the blood from his forehead, climbed out of the chamber, and went to fight a war. The Battle of Hogwarts, as it would later be called, began at sunset. They came from every direction. Death Eaters in black robes and silver masks, giants striding through the twilight, Dementors flowing across the sky like a black tide. Voldemort's full force, committed without reservation, because the Dark Lord had felt his Horcruxes dying one by one and knew, with the cold clarity of a brilliant psychopath, that his immortality was crumbling and his only chance was to kill Harry Potter before the last anchors were destroyed. Harry stood on the astronomy tower and watched them come, and he was not afraid. Not because he was foolish. Not because he was numb. But because the fear had burned away somewhere in the last 3 days, in Gringotts, in the Wizengamot, in a sea cave in Cornwall, in a bank vault full of cursed gold and a chamber deep beneath the school where he'd finally, permanently, cut the cord between himself and the monster who'd killed his parents. He wasn't Dumbledore's weapon. He wasn't the prophecy's puppet. He was Harry Potter, Lord of 3 Houses, the last Peverell, and he chose to fight. The defenders of Hogwarts met the attackers at the gates. McGonagall commanded the castle's stone guardians, suits of armor and animated statues that charged into battle with medieval enthusiasm. Neville led a group of DA members who'd been smuggled back into the castle through the Room of Requirements passage to the Hog's Head. Ron coordinated the defenses of the lower floors with the tactical mind of a chess player who'd graduated from the board to the battlefield. Lupin and Tonks held the corridor to the hospital wing. The Weasley twins, because of course they were there, of course they'd come, had turned the third-floor corridor into a gauntlet of magical traps that would have made a goblin siege engineer weep with pride. Harry went hunting. He moved through the battle like a shadow, the Peverell cloak making him not invisible but difficult, hard to track, hard to target, a presence that slipped between spells and around obstacles with a fluidity that came from magic older than wandwork. The Peverell sword cut through shields and curses and the enchanted armor of Death Eaters who never saw the blade coming. He found Bellatrix Lestrange in the Great Hall, dueling 3 people at once and laughing, and he hit her with a stunner so powerful it picked her up and threw her through the wall behind the head table. She didn't get up. He found Fenrir Greyback on the 7th floor, slavering over a fallen student, and the Peverell sword took the werewolf's one hand off at the wrist before Greyback even registered Harry's presence. A full-body bind left him for the Aurors. He found Lucius Malfoy in the courtyard, fighting half-heartedly, his heart clearly not in it, and Harry disarmed him with a flick of his wand and said, "Go home to your son, Malfoy. This is your only chance," and watched the man disapparate without a backward glance. And then he found Voldemort. The Dark Lord was in the courtyard near the Forbidden Forest, surrounded by the bodies of his own followers, some dead, some dying, discarded without a thought the moment they ceased to be useful. Nagini coiled at his feet, massive and hissing, and Voldemort himself stood like a monument to everything wrong with the wizarding world, tall, white, inhuman, power radiating off him in waves that made the air shimmer. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice was soft, almost conversational. "I felt them die. My treasures. My anchors. One by one, torn away." His red eyes burned. "You've been busy." "I've had a productive week." Voldemort smiled. It was the worst thing Harry had ever seen. The old man's pet, off the leash at last. "Tell me, does it feel good? The freedom? The power? You and I are not so different, you know. We both grew up unwanted, unloved, shaped by men who thought they knew better. We both found our true strength by breaking free." "We're nothing alike," Harry said. "You break things because you're afraid of them. I break things that deserve to be broken." The duel began without warning. No bowing, no formalities, no theatrical countdown. Voldemort struck with the killing curse, the green bolt scything through the evening air, and Harry sidestepped it, not with a dodge but with a fluid motion that the Peverell cloak enhanced, making him faster than physics should allow. He returned fire. Not with Expelliarmus, not this time. The Peverell sword sang through the air, trailing magic that cut through Voldemort's shield like it was tissue paper, and the Dark Lord's eyes went wide with something Harry had never seen in them before. Recognition. And beneath it, something very close to fear. "Peverell steel," Voldemort hissed. The lost line. Not lost anymore. They fought. It was nothing like the graveyard, nothing like the Ministry atrium. Those had been confrontations between a powerful Dark Lord and a talented but outmatched boy. This was a war between equals, Harry's triple house magic amplified by the Peverell inheritance, his understanding of soul magic and death magic giving him insights into Voldemort's style that the Dark Lord couldn't have predicted. Voldemort was brilliant. His spellwork was a masterclass in dark magic, curses Harry had never seen, combinations that shouldn't have been possible, raw power deployed with the precision of a surgical instrument. He fought with the desperation of a man who had just discovered his immortality was an illusion, and desperation made him dangerous. But Harry had something Voldemort didn't. Not love, though that was there too, in the faces of the people fighting beside him, in the memory of his parents, in the stubborn warmth he felt for a world that had lied to him and hurt him and was still worth saving. What Harry had was completion. He was whole. The fragment of Voldemort's soul was gone from his head. The chains Dumbledore had wrapped around his life were broken. The truth of his blood and his heritage was acknowledged. For the first time, Harry Potter was entirely himself, and himself turned out to be more than anyone, including Harry, had ever imagined. Nagini struck. The snake lunged from the shadows, jaws wide, and Harry brought the Peverell sword down in an arc that took the serpent's head off in a single stroke. The last Horcrux died in a spray of dark ichor and a scream that was both the snake's and Voldemort's, because the Dark Lord felt it, felt the last anchor shatter, felt his soul become singular and mortal and fragile. Voldemort staggered. "No," the Dark Lord whispered. "No, this isn't. I am Lord Voldemort, I have conquered death, I cannot." "You never conquered death," Harry said. "You ran from it. The Peverells, my family, they walked beside it. There's a difference." He raised his wand. Not the Peverell sword, his wand, the holly and phoenix feather wand that had chosen him at 11, the brother wand to Voldemort's own, the first magical object that had ever been his. "Avada Kedavra," Harry said. The words felt different in his mouth than he'd expected. Not dark. Not corrupted. They felt like what they'd originally been, a release, a mercy, a separation of soul from body designed by his ancestors for the dying and the desperate. The green light left his wand at the same moment Voldemort cast his own killing curse, and the two beams met in the space between them, not in the golden cage of Priori Incantatem, not this time, because Harry wasn't fighting with a brother wand's echo. He was fighting with the full authority of the Peverell line, the family that had created the curse, and the magic recognized its master. Harry's spell absorbed Voldemort's. Swallowed it whole. The green light blazed brighter, fiercer, and struck Tom Marvolo Riddle in the chest. Voldemort fell. There was no drama in it. No extended death scene, no final words, no lingering transformation. One moment, the darkest wizard of the age was standing. The next, he was on the ground, empty-eyed, mortal, dead. The silence that followed was enormous. It spread outward from the courtyard like a wave, carrying the news through the castle. The Death Eaters felt their marks burn and fade, the Dementors scattered, the giants turned and lumbered away, suddenly purposeless. In the great hall, someone started cheering, and the sound built and built until it shook the stones. Harry stood over the body of his parents' murderer, the Peverell sword in one hand and his wand in the other, and felt the strangest, most unexpected emotion of his life. Sadness. Not for Voldemort. For all of it, the years, the waste, the children who grew up without parents, the parents who never grew old, the damage done by fear and hatred and the arrogance of powerful men who thought they knew best. He sheathed the sword. Pocketed his wand. Turned around. Neville was there, bleeding from a cut on his forehead and grinning like a maniac. Ron was limping but upright, his arm around Hermione, who was crying and laughing at the same time. McGonagall stood at the entrance to the courtyard with tears streaming silently down her face. Kingsley was there, and Tonks, and Lupin, and Arthur and Molly and the twins and Ginny, who looked at him across the courtyard with an expression that said they had a lot to talk about and none of it was going to be simple and she was absolutely fine with that. And in the doorway of the castle, leaning heavily on the stone, too weak to walk but too stubborn to miss this, Albus Dumbledore watched the young man he had wronged and shaped and stolen from and loved, in his broken, insufficient way, walk out of the war alive. The days that followed were chaos. The good kind, mostly, the kind where a world that had been held together by fear and lies starts to rebuild itself around something sturdier. Dumbledore surrendered himself to the Wizengamot 3 days after the battle. He appeared voluntarily, as Harry had demanded, and submitted to judgment without protest. The charges were read: line theft, violation of the sacred trust of guardianship, fraud, conspiracy to pervert the course of magical justice, and illegal sealing of a legally filed last will and testament. He pleaded guilty to all counts. Harry, true to his word, argued for leniency. It was the hardest speech he'd ever given, standing in the same chamber where he'd exposed the theft, looking at the same faces, and asking them to show mercy to the man who had stolen his childhood. Albus Dumbledore did terrible things, Harry told the Wizengamot. He did them for reasons he believed were good, and some of them, the protection of the wizarding world, the fight against Voldemort, were genuinely important. That doesn't excuse the theft, the manipulation, or the lies. But it means the man who did those things is not a monster. He's a human being who lost his way, and the measure of a just society is how it treats even those who have failed it. Dumbledore was sentenced to house arrest at Hogwarts for the remainder of his life, which, given the curse eating its way through his body, would not be long. He was stripped of all titles and positions. He was ordered to make full financial restitution to every family he had defrauded, the cost to be met by the liquidation of his personal assets and the redirection of his Hogwarts pension. He accepted every condition without argument. Daphne's political work during the battle and its aftermath turned out to be as consequential as any spell cast in the fighting. Using Harry's 3 proxy votes and the coalition she'd built, she pushed through a series of reforms that restructured the Wizengamot's oversight mechanisms, new transparency requirements for the Chief Warlock's office, mandatory audits of Guardian-managed estates, and a formal separation of the Chief Warlock's judicial and financial authorities that should have existed centuries ago. "You're terrifyingly good at this," Harry told her, reviewing the reform proposals over dinner at Grimmauld Place a week after the battle. "I've had years to think about what a fair system would look like," she said. "All I needed was the opportunity to build it. And 3 Wizengamot seats." "And 3 Wizengamot seats," she agreed, and smiled, and it was the warmest expression he'd ever seen on her face. The Weasley situation resolved itself with characteristic Weasley directness. Molly and Arthur came to Grimmauld Place, sat at the kitchen table, and Molly said, "We've looked at every bank record, every letter, every deposit slip. We didn't know. We thought it was Pruitt money. But ignorance isn't innocence, and we should have asked more questions, and I am sorry, Harry. More sorry than I know how to say." Harry accepted the apology, and Molly cried, and Arthur shook his hand with tears in his own eyes, and Ron sat in the corner looking like a man who'd been carrying a weight for days and had finally been allowed to set it down. The Potter fortune was restored. Gringotts enforced full restitution with the efficiency and enthusiasm of an institution that takes financial crimes personally. The Longbottom estate was repaid. The Greengrass losses were compensated through the ministry's new victims fund. And the 23 families, which had grown to over 40 by the time the audits were complete, all received their stolen money back, with interest calculated at goblin rates, which were generous in a way that goblins found deeply satisfying and wizards found mildly alarming. Harry visited Potter Manor on a warm August evening, a week after his 17th birthday. Dumbledore had given up the Fidelius secret willingly, one of the conditions of his plea agreement, and the manor materialized in the Welsh countryside like a dream remembering itself, stone walls and climbing roses and windows that caught the sunset like amber. It was beautiful. Not ostentatiously grand, not cold and imposing, but warm and solid and alive, the kind of place where children would have grown up happy, where a family would have built a life, where James and Lily Potter would have raised their son if the world had been kinder. Harry walked through the empty rooms and ran his hands along the walls and felt the house's magic welcome him home. The Lord of Potter, the blood of this place, finally returned. There were photographs on the mantelpiece, preserved by stasis charms, James and Lily on their wedding day, laughing, young, impossibly alive. A baby with green eyes and unruly black hair, reaching for the camera with chubby fingers. A family. He sat on the floor of the living room and looked at those photographs for a very long time, and he didn't cry, because he was done crying. Instead, he made a promise. Not out loud, just in his heart, in the silence of the house his parents had loved. "I'll fill these rooms again. Not with grief. With life." He stood, dusted off his robes, and walked out into the evening light. Neville was waiting by the gate, and Ron was arguing with Hermione about something trivial and wonderful, and Daphne was reading a legal document while somehow also navigating the uneven garden path without looking up, and somewhere behind them all, the sun was setting on the first day of a world without Voldemort, without lies, without chains. Harry Potter, Lord of the most ancient and noble houses of Potter, Black, and Peverell, looked at the people who had stood beside him and the home that had waited for him and the future that was finally, entirely, his own. And he smiled.